What's up? Are we live? Is it working? This thing never says live now when you go live. Are we live? Yes, we are. Can I be heard? What's up, y'all? How you doing today? Happy Lord's Day. We're live. Is the audio good? Because this is going to be a little weird the way I've got it rigged up. I had to go buy a PC because of the streaming issues with Catalina and OBS. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, I'll put a link to the debate. We're going to be playing the debate, so I don't know if I'll play the whole debate because it's about 2 hours, but we're going to be skipping around. So we got some incense blowing here. We're going to let the incense blow. Debate is on YouTube, multiple places, 100,000, 50,000, very well known. No, the bookshelf is not back. That's just that's the books that I had with me in Florida. The bookshelves, the thousands of books are in storage. I'll have them back very soon. I'm going to let some people roll up in here. I will have this entire room filled out, both walls, and then we actually have another room for the spillover. It will also be full as well. So literally the half of my house is library. The book props are back because, of course, it's all fake. There was a trad today who was saying that all the photos that I did of the priests that I've interviewed, it's all fake. Yeah, it's all staged. So that's the level that the trads have resorted to now, is that I photoshopped all of my all the photographs, all the interviews are fake. I spliced my voice in. So it's all fake. So today we're going to be reviewing and analyzing the Great Debate. This is the greatest debate of the 20th century. The Father Copleston Bertrand Russell debate is retarded. It's not any good. It's a dumb debate. Actually, Stein will reference that debate as if that's the Great Debate. Little did Stein know that he was actually getting demolished in the 20th century's greatest debate. So poor Gordon Stein, I think he never recovered from this debate and ended up totally demolished. So we're going to be reviewing it point by point, and I think it would be very instructive because actually Jamie was asking me about apologetics. She was asking me about what's the relationship of Christianity to philosophy, how the church fathers view philosophy, where has it become a problem, how are we not deceived by worldly philosophy, as Paul says. And yet, many of the greatest church fathers were trained in classical pedagogy and philosophy. Basil has a whole letter where he discusses the advantages of classical education, pedagogy. St. Gregory Palamas himself was trained in Aristotelian logic. The deepest, most difficult, one of the most difficult fathers of the church is, of course, St. Maximus himself. And so you can get the Ambigua, and you get Athanasium, difficulties in the church fathers. And you'll find that these are very scholastic treatises. Wait a minute, I thought the church fathers I thought Orthodoxy was against being scholastic. No. We are against scholasticism, which is a Western theological system and presupposition. It's a approach to philosophy with a different ordo theologiae. So it has nothing to do with being anti-scholarly, anti-intellectual, anti-reason, or any of these other things that are misunderstandings. Reason has a proper place, right? But in Orthodox theology, it's not the highest faculty in man. The nous is the highest faculty in man. And the nous is only functioning properly when it's in tandem with the heart, right? So you can't have this division between pure intellect and repentance. So you have to repent in order to properly understand the world. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you guys. Much appreciated. Welcome. So the other thing we want to do in this the guy I'm going to debate is a scholar and a lion. Okay, well, and he will eat me alive. Okay, so if you're here to, this is what you're here to do is shit talk like this. Come on, dude. It's funny because I talked to the guy that I'll be debating, and he has no philosophical training. So anyway, you're out of here, dude. What we want to do is clear up misconceptions. I mean, I know that the triads are not going to listen to us because they just say that anything that comes from a person, genetic fallacy, is Calvinism. So they'll use Aristotle, but when you use Aristotle, it's okay. But if I were to use a transcendental argument, it's a Calvinist argument because it comes from Greg Bahnsen and Cornelius Van Til. But you can use Aristotle. I mean, this is the level of low IQ that we have to deal with, where we can't look at argumentation as if it's true on its own grounds, irrespective of the source of where it comes from. That's one way to avoid the genetic fallacy, is that we can understand objective truth apart from the sources from where it comes. And that's ultimately because, as St. Maximus teaches us in his many definitive places in the Ambiguo, where he covers the logi, the truths that we find in the world in any religion are ultimately derived from Christ. Are there truths outside of the bounds of Orthodox Christianity? Sure. We've never denied that. That's never been at the issue. The issue is about natural theology. The issue is about why Maximus doesn't do natural theology. And in fact, revealed theology, natural revelation, is a better way to characterize it. Because for St. Maximus, the content of what the Roman Catholics are calling natural theology, the content of that theology is the same content as revealed theology. It's two different means of that theology coming to us. That will come into play in today's discussion because we are going to be talking about Greg Bahnsen and Calvinist theology. So we also want to be able to explicate how Calvinist theology is not bound up with transcendental argumentation, as if the only way to do a transcendental argument is to be a Calvinist. That's completely ridiculous. I mean, don't you think I know these topics like the back of my hand? I lived them and breathed them through my 20s and my 30s. Thank you. I'm very blessed. Glad to have a house. It's a gigantic mansion palace estate with 2-car garage for the 2 Bentleys that I own because I sold my soul to the devil, and Wiccafays did a ritual, and that's how I got my Bentleys in my palace. That is, if you believe the trad smears, which are all they ever do is do 2-hour videos on trying to smear you. They don't actually deal with who you are, your argumentation. But we will be taking super chats, so if you want to support Jay's analysis, feel free to with super chats. A couple things we wanted to mention too. Of course, again, the Ambiguo are very difficult works, but they are worth mentioning because what we see in St. Maximus, if you're familiar with the Bradshaw treatise, Aristotle, East and West, then you would be aware that St. Maximus has a different usage of Aristotle, as does St. John of Damascus. Now, we've covered this for many years. I lectured on this 4 years ago now. I lectured on Fount of Knowledge 4 years ago, and classical theists just ignored it, acted like I never did. As if I didn't talk about how John of Damascus uses the terms potentiality, actuality, as if I didn't talk about all of those things in the philosophical chapters 4 years ago. And then we lectured through the entirety of this book. But the reason I'm bringing this book up is that we want to point out, first of all, John of Damascus, at the beginning of the book, uses a transcendental argument for God. Absolutely he does. Now, I think this actually refutes Dr. Malpass, who in our debate said that there's no transcendental argument in Aristotle. Well, St. John of Damascus appears to get his argumentation most likely from Aristotle, because the entire Fount of Knowledge, not totally, but it relies a lot on Aristotle. So once again, we don't fall into the genetic fallacy of saying that we have to reject everything that Aristotle says, that we have to reject everything that Plato says. We also don't fall into the word concept fallacy of saying that because Plato or Plotinus uses logos, it means the exact same thing that John means when he says in John 1, logos. Orthodoxy is different in that it's not bound to those systems, and it was able to take words and concepts and transform them from Hellenic culture. But unfortunately, this causes a lot of confusion, and this is the root of most of the lack of progress in discussions and debates that we have with the Roman Catholics. So I want to remind everybody that at the beginning of this book, because they will say, there's no transcendental argument in John Damascus. There is. Let's read it. So this is on pages 12 and 13. He says, there are, however, some people who have endeavored to do away with philosophy entirely. By the way, how many of the fideistic so-called Orthodox say that there's no use for philosophy? Well, this is a whole book on it, on the proper use of philosophy, the philosophical chapters. The church fathers teach philosophy. We teach what the church fathers teach about philosophy. And so he's rebuking not just people who would do away with it like sophists, but he's actually rebuking even the people who would say that philosophy is useless. Now, ultimately, though, he's responding to the sophist. What would you say, Aristotle, in metaphysics? Aristotle says that there's an opponent. He says, what would you say to the opponent who says that philosophy itself cannot justify philosophy? Logic can't justify logic. And John Damascus essentially uses the same argument from Aristotle's metaphysics, where he says, which proves that John Damascus at least understood Aristotle to be using a transcendental argument, which Malpass had no knowledge of. When he did his response, he had no knowledge of this, didn't even acknowledge. He doesn't know who John Damascus is. How is it that you say that there is neither philosophy nor knowledge nor perception? Do you know and perceive? Or is it by your not knowing and perceiving it? St. John is replying to the skeptic. If you perceive it, well, then you have knowledge and perception. But if it is by not knowing it, then no one will believe you, since you are discussing something of which you have no knowledge. Since then there is such a thing as philosophy, and since there is such a thing as knowledge, let us talk about knowledge, being, and philosophy. So he begins the work with a transcendental argument, and he argues against the sophist, right? And he says that sophistry is self-refuting because it presupposes the things that it would like to critique and refute. In arguing against logic, you have presupposed logic. So the work is called The Fount of Knowledge, or the Philosophical Chapters. And it's one of the classic works from the Orthodox Fathers on philosophy and the good of philosophy. Now, having dedicated 20 years to the church, well, not 13, 14 years to the church fathers, 20 years to studying philosophy, 20 years to studying transcendental argumentation, I know this topic. I know it very well. I have grad papers I've written on this topic. I have posted my grad papers on this topic where we discuss whether propositions, beliefs, predication, are they theory-laden or do they come to us as brute factuality? So what you're going to see in this great debate is that most of the controversial, confused topics that come up when people analyze the stuff that we talk about, when they have objections to what we talk about, they're all going to come up in the Bahnsen Stein debate. And it's going to be a great place for me to contrast our view from Roman Catholicism and from Calvinism. So we'll see the distinction between Protestantism, Roman Catholicism, and our position in our apologetic in this debate. Now, I'm going to put into the chat another great testament to why we don't believe in natural theology. There's a whole essay in St. Justin Popovich's famous book, Orthodox Faith and Life in Christ, because apparently there are some Orthodox people who don't know what we're talking about, who think that because Maximus uses the term law of nature, that means Thomistic natural theology, making the same word concept mistake that the Thomists make. And this is refuted adequately in the excellent chapter in this book, which is online, which I'm going to put into the chat right now from St. Justin Popovich, about the epistemology of St. Isaac the Syrian. What is the epistemology of St. Isaac the Syrian? Well, it's an epistemology based on the logi, based on the doctrine of the logi. The logi doctrine, which does not begin with St. Maximus, right? This goes back to St. Paul. Paul talks about Christ being present in all things being made through Christ, Christ holding all things in being. him being the ground of all reality ultimately. In Colossians, all things by him, for him, through him. Christ is the arche, Christ is the telos, Christ is the sustainer of reality, the triadic mode of reality, of created reality that ultimately derives from Aristotle that St. Maximus uses. So what we want to talk about is the proper use of philosophy and the proper understanding of interpreting the natural world. So what you will notice is that there's a perfect harmony between what St. Justin Popovich says and what Father Stein Debate says. In that first chapter where he refutes natural theology and talks about how what we believe in is natural revelation, you're going to see that it's exactly what St. Justin Popovich says. The Orthodox Church does not teach natural theology, you see. And when I quote that, when I show that, then people lie and they say, oh, well, he's an ecumenist. No, he's not. We proved on my Twitter, I shared the essay he has against ecumenism. So just another lie. Lie. All that we see is lies. And then when we come to the essay from St. Justin Popovich about the theory of knowledge, that's called epistemology. Same thing. Justin Popovich has an essay on epistemology, you see. It's very frustrating to have to deal with the arrogance, the low IQ, the stupidity, the hard-headedness, the prelest of people who think that they're being pious, who want to one-up everybody, and they'll say something like, Orthodoxy doesn't do philosophy. Do you understand that the term theory of knowledge, it just means epistemology? Epistemology is your theory of knowledge. It means the same thing. So people get hung up, though, on words and terms, and that's a huge source of confusion. In fact, wasn't it great when Dr. Bradshaw went on Reason and Theology with Candy Ibarra and Lofton and said everything that I said? I mean, I read Bradshaw's works 10 years ago. Don't you think I was relaying what he says and correct information? And Ibarra and Lofton were like, ugh, like they couldn't believe that when Dr. Bradshaw was on, that he said all the stuff I say. Well, of course. I mean, guess what? I'm not lying. Like, I really have studied these things. Like, why is it hard to believe? What? Just this silly, inane kind of like resorting to saying that it's all movie sets and like the sticky notes are just stuck in the books. I cannot really read them. Anyway, being silly, but so the mystery of knowledge that you'll notice, I remember when I first encountered that, I was still in the vein of Thomism and thinking like a Thomist, and I couldn't understand how they were saying Orthodoxy was different, because I knew about Calvinism, which is what we're going to start here in a minute. Being a Calvinist, studying under Bahnsen, not directly under Bahnsen, but I went to Bahnsen Seminary for a year, studied under Chris Strevel when Bahnsen Seminary was a thing. And so I knew about the Cornelius Van Til Bahnsen critiques of natural theology. And in fact, Van Til has a whole book on this. But I couldn't get over the fact that Van Til had all these things wrong, right? So I didn't, back in 2002, I didn't know about Orthodoxy really. I just started reading the Latin Fathers, and I read a bunch of Augustine, thousands of pages of Augustine, and then I read everything I could get my hands on in terms of Aquinas back then. And so I ended up, going in the direction of Aquinas because it just seemed like, well, you got all these things about the papacy in the early church. You've got all these things about, the episcopacy, the sacraments, the real presence, all these other things in the fathers. So gradually I was just like, I'm not buying this Calvinism stuff anymore. So I didn't really know about Orthodox perspectives. I hadn't read Maximus yet. Didn't know anything about St. Maximus. Didn't know anything about Christology. Didn't know anything about the essence energy distinction yet. I was about to start looking into that question. But I knew that there was there were some things lingering in my head that Van Til had critiqued in Aquinas. What is that book? There's a book by Van Til where he critiques Aquinas' epistemology. And he actually has some good arguments. Now, I don't think that Van Til's answers are right. But the point is that I didn't get answers to those questions until I read Stein Debate, and he answers those questions because he solves a lot of the questions that come up with Van Til, divine conceptualism, the exemplars through the Logi. Now, the next book, one of the first books that really started answering my questions. Now, there's a lot of haters of this book, but they're all people who've never read it. I can assure you that, because it's a great book, and all it is a systematization of the doctrine of the essence-energy distinction from the fathers. That's all it is, really. An argument presenting the fact that the church fathers actually teach the essence-energy distinction. That's fundamental to their Christology and their triadology, and that the triadology is the conditioner of the Christology. So, God, History, and Dialectic, Volume 1 is the most important volume. And I think Dr. Farrell shows beyond any shadow of a doubt that absolute divine simplicity is the Hellenic root and error that most of the church fathers are combating. The notion of dialectical opposition, we're speaking metaphysically here, like these people who think that I reject dialectics because I talk about dialectics, and they don't even understand that metaphysical dialectics isn't the same thing as pedagogical dialectics, dummy. Pedagogical dialectics is when you're talking about exchanges of ideas. That's what debate is. So I wouldn't be doing debates if I rejected dialectics in terms of debate. That's idiotic. That just shows you have no idea what you're talking about. That's totally different. It's related, but very different from metaphysical dialectics, that things are in tension in the natural world, that principles are in tension, like unity and multiplicity, have some inherent tension in them. That's fundamental to Plato, for example. That's not the same thing as dialogical dialectics, exchange of ideas. That's a great thing. It's a positive thing. I've said that like probably 50 times. Every exchange of information and ideas is a dialectical exchange. That's not metaphysical dialectics. That's not the same thing as saying that the one and the many are in tension. Two different things, obviously. So, I wanted to make another point too before we start the Bahnsen Stein debate, which is about to kick off here. Some other people have commented this the last few days about the essence-energy distinction, as if this starts with Basil. No. Right, so St. Paul uses energeia many times. Go listen to the Bradshaw talks. I mean, Bradshaw explains this back to Moses and Philo, right? So the essence-energy distinction is a doctrine that comes to us from revealed theology. It's not something that we sit around and speculate about. It's not an academic, philosophic speculation. Essence-energy distinction is dogma. The essence-energy distinction is in our liturgy. It's in our liturgy when we talk about baptism, when the priest prays that the uncreated energies of God come into the font. The essence-energy distinction comes up in the Sundays in Lent that deal with St. Gregory Palamas. It's all through the liturgy. So obviously it's not an academic dispute, right? So the issue is not being scholarly, being academic. The issue is the excess of academics as if that's a replacement for repentance and for participation in the life of the church, right? That's the problem. That's why we're not Fortumites. Fortumites are all people who worship academics and academia. The problem is not being scholarly. All of these church fathers, all of these 20th century saints, all of these, Father Seraphim Rose, they're very scholarly, you see. Has nothing to do with being scholastic. It has to do with being into scholasticism, which is a faulty methodology and the wrong ordo theologiae. And if you read God, History, and Dialectic, you'll see how there's two different ordo theologies. That's why we're not Thomists. That's why we can't be Thomists. That's why we can never accept created grace and these created light of Tabor and all these dumb heresies of the Roman Catholic Church, which they have dogmatically affirmed. And that's why none of them will come debate it, because I will take them point by point by point by point through the places where it is dogmatic. I'm waiting on a Thomist to come on here and we'll work. I'll screenshot every single section and page of the Summa that I work through. I may just have to do like a 20-hour stream of just going through the Summa, like volume 1. And then we'll do the Summa Contra Gentile. So just go through it for like 20 hours straight. It'd be like an epic marathon stream, just totally demolishing that. But today we're not going to talk about all of that. I just wanted to clear that out of the way before we get into the heat. By the way, that guy, that Kurgan guy, I mean, all he does is ad hominem, and he won't debate. He said in his description, "I'm not going to debate Jay Dyer." By the way, and I'm not dissing Vox Gay. He's Vox Gay, right? Vox Day, this guy, the knockoff Vox Gay. All he does is call everybody gamma, and you look at the guy, and he's like, the poor man's Vox Day. He's like the gay, ugly Vox Day. And he said he won't debate. So he just calls people spurgs, has no knowledge of theology, no knowledge of philosophy. For him, Roman Catholicism is about defending crusades. That's your argument for Roman Catholicism. By the way, he's a sedevacantist. And he says, "When are you going to address Canon 188? I spent 30 minutes on Canon 188. So I didn't even listen to the stream. I should do. We're going to do a stream. I actually did a video, like an hour-long video that's had like 20,000 views 3 years ago, critiquing the Summa. I guess it's time to just do another one, and I'll just do lectures on the Summa, and I'll demonstrate to these goofy trads that I actually do know what Thomism is. I actually do know what Aquinas says. I'll get out all the secondary Thomist works. We'll work through question by question in the Summa. It'll be long. It'll be boring as crap, but we'll do it because that's the only thing that will prove to them, which won't even prove to them because it's not, at this point, they don't really care. They're just holding on to these positions because of pride, because they're more interested in being right than they are. And by the way, that guy wouldn't last 5 minutes in a debate. He just wants attention. I'm talking about this Kurgan, Cringegan. Yeah, that guy. I'm talking about the Kurgan guy, the knockoff poor man's garbage face Vox Day. Not dissing Vox Day, I'm talking about that dude. And to make his whole video, it's like 40 minutes of just calling me a gamma. Yeah, dude, I mean, my fiance is well known. She's hot. And you sit there with a garbage face alone. So all this does is speak to your own inadequacy, and just calling me Spurg. Why didn't you just say, "Hey, I want to reach out and debate"? He says it's manly and aggressive. It's not manly and aggressive to launch into these kind of attacks. It looks like you're off. He's written books about spec ops, so he might be disinformation. I mean, your average dude doesn't write books on spec ops. So he could be some kind of operative just there to interject nonsense. Yeah, I'm so wrecked. Like he says in the description of his show, he won't debate. I won't debate him. Oh, me lucky charms. Oh, me lucky charms. Me lucky sedevacantist charms. I'm going to wish on me lucky sedevacantist charms. I won't debate him. I won't. He's too stupid. When this guy admits he doesn't know anything about theology, he doesn't know anything about the history of these things, and he won't debate, it's just pitiful. He's manly and aggressive by calling people Spurgs online. Yeah, dude, whatever. But I want to point out, too, so as we move from St. Paul, the essence synergy distinction, because this came up today in some people's videos, it's Dionysius. It's in the divine names that we have the beginning of the essence synergy distinction. And then the trads all say, well, then Thomas Aquinas would have taught it. No, just because Thomas Aquinas, that's just assuming that Aquinas is right. He's not right. And he doesn't understand the distinction. And I've proven that 20 times over when you look at the way he rejects John Damascus's arguments for the essence synergy distinction. He has a whole section rejecting it. and rejecting John Damascus' arguments and citing Maimonides. All right, let's get into the Bahnsen debate. I don't think the debate with Ryan is on. I think he has things going on. I don't think he can do it. I actually told Ralph, I said, set up another debate. So Vox Day has also dissed me. Where did Vox Day diss me? So these guys now are dissing me. Is that true or is that drama? By the way, why doesn't any of these guys just come and do a debate? I think that there's obviously some intellectual pride issues that they don't want to lose a debate. The last I had heard, Vox Day said that he doesn't debate theology. It's not his topic. I heard him say something like, I'm talking about the Kurgan. I'm not talking about Vox Day. Vox Day said he doesn't debate theology. So, dude, these guys, I'm not being mean to Vox Day, but, I've reached out. I've asked him if he wanted to have discussions. He's always been respectful to me. So that sounds like fake drama. If you have if you want to prove or show me a clip where he was dissing us, that's fine. And by the way, I don't really care. Anybody who wants to can come on and debate. Anybody who wants to come in the Discord, we open it up every week. We've opened it up multiple times this week, and nobody comes in to debate. So if that Kurgan dude doesn't want to debate, kissing like a bandit, stealing time. All right, let's get into the real meat of this topic, what we're here to do, which is deconstruct the Bahnsen Stein debate. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this is going to be a long discussion. I'm going to be pausing it and commenting and trying to explain, because we're trying to do educational work here. We want to provide real education, real content. We don't spend 2 hours on personal smears and attacks. That's actually the gamma male mode, right? Because it just all I have to do to win all of these feuds is just put out consistent, high quality content. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we always have done. That's why we have hundreds and hundreds of talks that deal with quality content and material that the other people aren't doing. The haters don't do. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that a lot of people want to get you locked into some drama thing, and so that you'll expend all your time and energy doing dumb drama, when I could put out content that will be seen for years to come and get a lot more views than some nobody drama guy who nobody's going to remember in 5 years anyway. Nobody's going to remember the Kurgan in 5 years. Nobody's going to know who that dude is, especially when YouTube gets rid of all of these channels. Who is that guy? Oh, you mean the ugly version of Vox Day, the B-grade Vox Day? Oh yeah, that guy. That guy who didn't know anything about theology, had no philosophical training, and then wants to take on people who have graduate training in philosophy. It's like that trad who came in the discussion yesterday. We let another trad in, talking all this smack. Oh, I'm going to demolish you, bro. I'm going to demolish you. And he comes in and he doesn't know what Vatican I is. Literally, he says, is that a book? Is that a book? Is Vatican I a book? Really? You're going to come debate and you think Vatican I is a book? What is wrong with these people? They're captivated with some spirit of madness and they go crazy. And it's the same every time. I didn't think Vox Day was dissing us. He's always been cool. I haven't actually talked to him other than some emails. But so it was a comment on the blog. Yeah, well, I think that Kurgan dude wants to be Vox Day. And so he's wanting to come after me, which is fine. Why don't you just come debate? But he said on his blog, I won't debate Dyer. Roman Catholicism is true because of me lucky charms, and because of me bald head, and because of me crusades. As if you fought in the crusades. You weren't in no crusade, dude. What are you talking about? My crusades. You weren't even in a crusade. It's me heritage. Were there any Irish people even fighting in the crusade? What's Vatican I? Is that Da Vinci Code? Is that Da Vinci Code? So Knicks fans are disputing with Vox. Interesting. Over, I don't know what. What are they fighting over? That's the guy, the Ebola kid, is who came into the debate and didn't know what Vatican I was. So then he said, I don't think a debate would be fruitful. All right, enough of that drama. That stuff, this is a waste of time. We're going to lay down people will be watching the analysis of real material 10 years from now, Lord willing. And nobody's going to remember this dumb drama stuff. So we don't do the drama thing. We will respond to haters here and there, though. Keemstar debate. Actually, I said I would debate Keemstar. I tweeted at him, but that's out of my YouTube league. He got annoyed over the Groypers. Owen Benjamin versus Nick in a cage match. Yikes. I don't understand why people don't do, like, they won't just converse over the topics. I guess it's too much of a, like. All right, so the debate starts out, if you don't know, Greg Bahnsen was a Reformed Calvinist apologist. I would argue the best debater of the 20th century. I haven't heard anybody that would even hold a candle to the ability of Bahnsen to, with just laser-like Terminator precision, hone in on the opponent's position and basically just deconstruct in every possible way that the opponent made a mistake or logical fallacy. I mean, you're going to hear in the debate, if you've never heard it, just this amazing, literally, he's the Terminator of debate. And he just demolishes Gordon Stein, who I suppose he was like a decent biologist. I don't know, but Stein did his PhD in quails, the biology of quails. And like all of the atheist materialist types like JF or whoever, they think that because they've studied a lot of biology that they're somehow competent in all of the other fields. This is really the hubris that a lot of people get, that assuming that you know something about biology, or you've mastered biology, or you've mastered DNA and genetics, that therefore you are somehow competent in all these other fields. And a lot of people, they think that philosophy is like sitting around and pontificating about Jane Eyre.
What's your philosophy of becoming Jane? What's your reading of queer LGBT themes in Shakespeare? What do you think? Because everything is just an opinion on Shakespeare and liberal drama and blah, blah.
No, that's not what philosophy is. Philosophy is ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. 3 real branches of study. Branches of study that touch on all areas of life. So actually, and I'm not trying to toot horns, but if you look at the highest IQs of graduate studies, there's 2 fields: mathematics and engineering, and philosophy. Those are the 2 highest IQ grad study programs, like the people in those disciplines. And why is that? Well, the reason for that is because I'm saying like mathematics, engineering, physics, and philosophy. Because it's higher level abstracted thinking. That's why. Not everybody who does mathematics is good at philosophy, and not everybody in philosophy is good at mathematics, but it's similar in that it's abstracted levels of thinking. And because it's abstracted levels of thinking, it doesn't therefore mean that it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean that it's impractical per se. It could be impractical. You might get too stuck off in the realms of the ethereal. But philosophy is important for understanding who we are, where we come from. It's similar to theology. Ultimately, the content of philosophy is the same as theology, but in a sense, they're looking at things from a different angle. And if you read John Damascus in The Fount of Knowledge, you'll see him basically say that. So really, most of the time that people are coming at us or having a dispute with us, it's because of a misunderstanding of what the terms mean, their historic context, the nuance, and the assumption that things always mean the same thing in every single system. And that's actually going to come up with Bahnsen. So let's get to the Bahnsen-Stein debate, and we're going to hear, I think I have it set to where the introduction is. just so you know who these people are.
I'd like to introduce to you this evening's speakers. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Gordon Stein and Dr. Greg Bahnsen.
So testing that out. Can you guys hear that okay? I'm going to wait a little bit just to see if the chat can hear this before I just let it run for ever and ever and ever. Of course, chat's always a little bit behind, but if you would just let me know. Welcome, 234 nerds tonight. So the sound is okay. It's the best I could do with this little setup. I'm just getting things situated in the new house here. I've got like 3 pieces of furniture now. I'm collecting every 4 days. I get 1 piece of furniture, like a desk or a couch or whatever, every other day. All right, cool. It's a lot of applause.
I'd like to introduce each speaker to you now, let you know a little bit more about their biographical background. Dr. Greg Bahnsen holds the Master of Divinity and the Master of Theology from Westminster Theological Seminary, as well as a PhD in philosophy from the University of Southern California. He has fulfilled professorships at Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi, and at Ashland Theological Seminary in Ohio. He is a member of the Evangelical Theological Society, the Society of Christian Philosophers, the American Philosophical Society, as well as an advisory board member of the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. Dr. Bahnsen has published numerous articles on apologetics, ethics, and Christian theology, as well as 4 scholarly books. Dr. Bahnsen is currently the pastor of Covenant Community Church, located in Placentia, California, and resides in the Orange County area with his wife, Kathy, and his 4 children. Debating Dr. Bahnsen this evening will be Dr. Gordon Stein. Dr. Gordon Stein received a PhD from Ohio State University. He has established himself as one of America's foremost scholars of atheism. He is currently the president of the American Rationalist Federation, president of the Free Thought Association, member of the board of directors of the North American Committee for Humanism, vice president Pacific of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and vice president of Atheists United. Dr. Stein has authored 5 leading books, 2 pamphlets, one of which, by the way, is entitled How to Argue with a Theist and Win, as well as several scholarly articles. He is also the editor of the American Rationalist Journal and the associate editor of Free Inquiry magazine. Having introduced both speakers to you, we will now begin this evening's debate. The resolution before us is in the form of an interrogative, a question. Does God exist? Dr. Bahnsen, I'll now ask for your 15-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you, David. I want to begin this evening with 3 opening and introductory remarks about the nature of the debate itself. First of all, it's necessary at the outset of our debate to define our terms. That's always the case. And in particular here, I should make it clear what I mean when I use the term God. I want to specify that I'm arguing particularly in favor of Christian theism and for it as a unit or system of thought, and not for anything like theism in general. And there are reasons for that. 3, the various conceptions of deity found in the world religions are, in most cases, logically incompatible, leaving no unambiguous sense to general theism, whatever that might be. Secondly, I have not found the non-Christian religions to be philosophically defensible, each of them being internally incoherent or undermining human reason and experience. And thirdly, since I am, by the grace of God, a Christian, I cannot from the heart adequately defend those religious faiths with which I disagree. My commitment is to the triune God and Christian worldview based on God's revelation in the Old and New Testaments. So first, then, I'm defending Christian theism. Secondly, I want to observe, and we should indicate just what it is and is not at issue in the debate, on the basis of which we hope you'll consider the debate. It must be made clear that we are debating about philosophical systems, not the people who adhere to or profess them. Our concern is with the objective merits of the case which can be made for atheism or Christian theism, not related subjective or personal matters. And again, I have 3 reasons for illustrations of this. The personalities of those individuals who adhere to different systems of thought are not really relevant to the truth or falsity of the claims made by those systems. Atheists and Christians can equally be found emotional, unlearned, intolerant, or rude in their approaches. Secondly, subjective claims made about the experience of inner satisfaction or peace, claims that are made, interestingly, by both Christians and atheists in their literature. And promotional claims made about the superiority of Christianity or atheism. For instance, some atheist literature suggests that greater mental health comes through the independence of the atheist outlook. These sorts of things are always subject to conflicting interpretations and explanations, being, I think, more autobiographical rather than telling us anything for sure about the truth of the system under consideration. Thirdly, the issue is not whether atheists or professing Christians have ever done anything undesirable or morally unacceptable. One need only think respectively of the atheist involvement in the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution and the professing Christian involvement in the Spanish Inquisition. Now, the question is not whether adherents of these systems have lived spotless lives, but whether atheism or Christian theism as philosophical systems are objectively true.
All right, let's start with our first point here. So Bahnsen starts out by trying to clear the row, to clear the garden of the weeds of confusion, which is that he's not going to be using natural theology and he's not going to be arguing for generic theism. And we would agree with that. Again, I've cited you all the sources over and over and over that Orthodox theology does not affirm the natural theology of Thomism. And if you've read Bahnsen, I've read almost all of Bahnsen's books. The only one I haven't read is the newer one that came out as a Festschrift in honor of him after he passed away. And I've read almost all of Van Til's books. I think maybe one or two of the smaller ones I haven't read. But what you'll know from Bahnsen and Van Til is that the critiques of natural theology have nothing to do with just on the basis of there being total depravity. It is true that some of their argumentation is wrong because they believed in total depravity as Calvinists, and so they were inconsistent when it comes to the noetic effects of sin continuing to affect a person after salvation, even after conversion. The noetic effects of sin in the Calvinist worldview are such that you are always clouded and confused and can never have the certitude and the inerrancy and infallibility that Calvinism needs to be able to know things like what the texts say or what the canon of Scripture is. And that is true. In fact, if you read the Westminster Confession of Faith, it's very clear that the noetic effects of sin continue after a person has been converted or regenerated. And therefore, it's impossible for them to consistently continue to argue for certitude and believing in an inerrant choice of what books go into the canon by the church after the apostles, right? This is the Calvinists will admit that this was done centuries after the time of the apostles. But they think that it was a fallible decision by fallible men of an inerrant, inspired canon. That's retarded. That's ridiculous, okay? So that's a big problem. But that's not why we reject natural theology. We reject natural theology not because man is depraved, but because the content of the revelation of the natural world is the same as the content of what's in Scripture. And this, according to St. Maximus, is the reason for the Logi doctrine. The Logi doctrine is just the revelation of Christ as the meaning of all things, ultimately, all the many things, and ultimately all things gathered together in Him, according to St. Paul in Colossians. And that's true whether it's the content and the meaning of Scripture or whether it's the content of the natural world. The meaning of trees and sticks and rocks is the Logos. The meaning of the Bible is the Logos. The difference is two different types of revelation. The reason that we don't see the Logos when we look at the trees and the sticks and the rocks is because we're fallen, because our nous is clouded, because we do not participate in theosis anymore, and the natural man cannot receive the things of the Spirit. But the natural world testifies to the existence of the Logos, right? Now, Bahnsen and Van Til kind of think that that's true, but they're wrong on their anthropology because they have the Calvinistic doctrine of total depravity, which is heresy. So let's get back to Bahnsen, but I wanted to point that out, that he's right when he says that I'm not going to argue for natural theology and generic theism because I'm doing a disservice to my own apologetic when I'm arguing for the God that I don't actually believe in. The God that I believe in is the triune God who reveals himself first and foremost as personal to Moses, not as an impersonal essence or substance or something out of Hellenic metaphysics, you see.
And so I'll be defending Christian theism, and I'll be defending it as a philosophical system. And my last introductory remark is simply to the effect that I want to concede to my opponent all issues pertaining to the control of ovarian maturation in Japanese quail. Okay. The subject of his doctoral dissertation in 1974 at Ohio State.
That was a poisoning of the well. Bahnsen intentionally used the poisoning of the well, where he made a joke that I will concede everything to do with whale ovarian cancer or quail ovarian cancer because Dr. Gordon Stein's PhD was in the ovaries of quails. And so Bahnsen is poisoning the well by intentionally taking a jab at him and saying that you're not competent to be here debating philosophy. Nothing wrong with that because that's called rhetoric. The art of rhetoric utilizes jokes, jabs, subtle innuendos, and even insults at times. The greatest debates in history have included insults, jokes, and jabs. Go watch Peter Hitchens or anybody at Oxford debates, and you will find many, many examples of jokes, jabs, insults. It's part of rhetoric. So the mere fact that Inspiring Philosophy and Cameron Creeper, whatever his name was, that they didn't want to have a debate because I wouldn't agree to never use a joke, jab, or insult flies in the face of the history of all debate. Here's Bahnsen right away utilizing, as a subtle art trick of rhetoric, yes, a jab that his opponent is not competent in philosophy. Because guess what? He's not. So if your insult or your joke turns out to be true, then you can do it. You can get away with it. Now, if I come to a debate and I'm just like, you're dumb, you're retarded, you're stupid, you're blah, blah, and that's all I have, that's not a debate, right? This is what all the most of the trads, they think that a debate is like just yelling and calling people idiots and trying to smear them on a personal level. That's not a debate. A debate is an art form. A debate is taught in classical pedagogy. It's part of the great inheritance of the classical tradition. That's why the church fathers, that's why me, been tutoring people and teaching people classical pedagogy, classical education for years now. People pay for me to tutor them in these topics because it's a real thing, right? Nobody would pay me to tutor them if I didn't have the actual skills and ability to impart these skills to other people. So Bahnsen is correct. It's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with utilizing an ad hominem as a joke, perhaps, or a jab, or in this case, a poisoning of the well. And Bahnsen intentionally did that. Now, when Stein responds, that's the place for you to come back and respond with a joke, with a jab in response. Because wit, guess what? We're not robots exchanging algorithms. Wit, humor, those are parts of rhetoric. And if you don't have it, you're at a big disadvantage. And all the sourpusses, by the way, who come at me, have you noticed how many of them, they don't actually have any sense of humor? They can't make a joke. Like literally hardly any of them have ever made a joke. They can't make a crowd laugh. And I'm sorry, but if you can't make people laugh, you're at a huge disservice in persuading people to accept your opinions.
Stein is a man of intelligence, and that's not in question in this debate. I would not pretend to hold my own in a discussion with him of the empirical details of his narrow domain of specialized natural science. However, our subject tonight is really much different, calling for intelligent reflection upon issues which are philosophical or theological in character. For some reason, Dr. Stein has, over the last decade, left his field of expertise and given his life to a campaign for atheism. Whatever his perception of the reason for that, I do not believe that it is because of any genuinely cogent philosophical case which might be made for atheism as a worldview. And it's to this subject which I now turn for tonight's debate. My opening case for the existence of God will cover three areas of thought. They are the nature of evidence, the presuppositional conflict of worldviews, and finally the transcendental argument for God's existence. First of all, the nature of evidence. How should the difference of opinion between the theist and the atheist be rationally resolved? What Dr. Stein has written indicates that he, like many atheists, has not reflected adequately on this question. He writes, and I quote, "The question of the existence of God is a factual question and should be answered in the same way as any other factual question." End of quote. The assumption that all existence claims are questions about matters of fact, the assumption that these are all answered in the very same way, is not merely oversimplified and misleading. It is simply mistaken. The existence, factuality, or reality of different kinds of things is not established or disconfirmed in the same way in every case. We might ask, is there a box of crackers in the pantry? And we know how we would go about answering that question. But that is a far, far cry from the way we go about answering a question and determining the reality of, say, barometric pressure, quasars, gravitational attraction, elasticity, radioactivity, natural laws, names, grammar, numbers, the university itself that you're now at, past events, categories, future contingencies, laws of thought, political obligations, individual identity over time, causation, memories, dreams, or even love or beauty.
Now, that was a great point, and this completely flies over Stein's head. He has no conception whatsoever of what Bahnsen's trying to say. But Bahnsen's trying to point out that when you look at the approach of Stein and pretty much every atheist, materialist, empiricist, about 95% of them, this is in fact the key point that comes up with Matt Dillahunty in the debate I had with him, is that they assume that all questions are solved in the same way. So the same way that I will be convinced of the existence of God is the same way that I would go to the pantry to see if there's crackers there. Are there crackers in the pantry? Well, let's just go look, and if we see them and we get the sense data, we can then confirm or deny the existence of the crackers in the pantry. Now, I make the same point over and over and over, and I talk about, is it Lil Wayne or is it Bill Cosby that has moved next door to me, and I have to go and actually find out and see, right? That's a different type of question, and it's solved and known in a different way than other types of things that we believe and use and argue for. This should be common sense. It should be obvious, right? And Bahnsen just gave you a list of things that are proven in different ways, different types of things. Is the way that we prove or discuss or talk about morals, obligations, duties, ethics, beauty, aesthetics, the way things are proven in a case of a court of law? Is it always just a listing of the facts? No, there's more nuance. There's a lot more that goes into it. Logical laws, mathematics, concepts. And so what this does is from the outset, it sets the limits on what kinds of evidence will be accepted and therefore determines metaphysically what things exist. So basically what you're saying is I'm only going to accept empirical physical evidence for anything. And therefore, you're determining that only empirical physical objects exist. But if the type of thing that we're arguing for isn't physical, if it's not extended in time and space, if it's invariant, conceptual, logical, etc., then you've already established a limitation. You've set the bar from the outset to determine the types of things that you will allow to exist. I'm only going to accept evidence for physical things. In other words. But then that same guy will admit and allow all different types of things to exist and be argued for and be analyzed in a host of different ways. Different types of things are proven in different ways. And so if we come to the table and we're arguing for an invariant, immaterial, spiritual entity, God, a being like that, then it stands to reason that the way that we're going to argue for him is different than the way that we're going to argue for physical things. And when the atheist says, well, then I'm not going to accept any arguments unless they're physical, he's setting the bar and determining what metaphysics can and can't be from the outset when that's the very thing that's in question. And and if he doesn't want to do that, if he doesn't accept, he says, I don't accept anything immaterial, invariant, and conceptual. Then you're assuming that all things are proven in the exact same way, and we can prove all kinds of things that you yourself hold to that are not proven in the same way. When you go to investigate the past, do you just look and see in a cupboard the past existed? No. when you analyze obligations or ethics? You just look in a pantry under a microscope? No. So this is a really stupid fundamental philosophical blunder. And almost every atheist materialist makes this same basic mistake of acting like every single thing is argued for and proven in the same way. So Bahnsen kind of jokingly calls it the crackers in the pantry fallacy, because technically it's not a fallacy in some objective list of fallacies. It's a kind of fallacy that Bahnsen is making up, you could say, but it's accurate because he's pointing out that most of the atheist materialists will assume that everything is proven in the same way. And if you recall from the Dillahunty debate, one reason that he thought this, and he didn't think that there was any way to prove transcendentals, is because he assumed this, that everything is proven in the same way, and a transcendental or presupposition is just something you assume. No. It's an argument. That's what he doesn't get, and that's what he never got. And that's why they don't get the transcendental argument, because they don't understand that there's different types of argumentation. Now, so when we move to outside of normative logic and normative debate, and this is not something I made up, it's common in philosophy. It's common to talk about meta questions, meta logic, meta mathematics, meta ethics, meta physics. You can't just arbitrarily say, well, you can't ask those questions. There's no such thing as those questions. And a lot of atheists will do that. Be like, that's not a valid question. Says who? Says you just arbitrarily say you can't ask questions about metalogic. We began this discussion by looking at the metalogical argument of St. John Damascus, showing that to argue against the laws of logic assumes the laws of logic. So it's just arbitrary for them to say you can't ask metalogical, metaphysical questions. That's, again, setting the bar at a certain level from the outset, right? You're cutting off what types of evidence you will accept. The Procrustean bed. I will only accept physical evidence because physicalism is true. Well, we're here to debate physicalism. We are coming to the table saying that there's an immaterial invariant conceptual God that we want to argue for. And you're going to say, atheist, in response, you're going to say, well, but you can't prove it just by saying that there's other types of things. But that's correct. We're not proving it by saying that there's other types. What we're showing is that you don't even believe that. You don't believe that everything is proven in the same way. So if you don't believe that, and you will allow for other types of argumentation to exist for things that are not material, that are conceptual, then we've just shown that you have illogically and invalidly limited the scope of evidence from the outset to ensure that you can only accept and will only accept physical objects and empirical objects and data for empirical objects. And we can show that that's incoherent and inconsistent on your own grounds. And that's what Bahnsen's about to do in the next point.
In such cases, one does not do anything like walking to the pantry and looking inside for the crackers. There are thousands of existence or factual questions, and they are not at all answered in the same way in each case. Just think of the differences in argumentation and types of evidence used by biologists, grammarians, physicists, mathematicians, lawyers, logicians, mechanics, merchants, and artists.
Is all that solved in the same way? Do you just go and look in a microscope to solve every one of those issues in all those various fields? Obviously not. And no atheist would actually literally say that unless they're just completely insane. No materialist really thinks that. So they will allow for all kinds of different evidences, like in mathematics, right? Advanced mathematics, really high level math, or these other fields, computer science, etc. They'll allow for a lot of this abstract stuff that's not like going to just looking in the microscope and seeing what's there, right? So not all things are proven in the same way. So this is a really basic philosophic blunder that they all make.
It should be obvious that the type of evidence which one looks for in existence or factual claims will be determined by the field of discussion, and especially by the metaphysical nature of the entity mentioned in the claim under question.
You heard me say this very thing to Dillahunty and to JF. If the type of being that I'm arguing for is invariant and conceptual, then there's no way that I can give you a physical make the podium float type of proof for that being, because that type of being is not a physical being. Does that make sense? Do you see? So the atheist is literally saying, give me physical evidence for the immaterial being or I won't accept it. What? You don't do that for other things. You don't say, give me physical evidence of the number 7, or I won't believe in the number 7. Give me physical evidence of the law of non-contradiction, or I won't believe in the law of non-contradiction. No, they don't do that because they're inconsistent, because they try to set the bar from the outset as to what type of evidence will be accepted, and they have to have the crackers in the pantry fallacy to assume that all things are proven in the same way to start the debate with that nonsense.
Dr. Stein's remark that the existence of God is answered, the question of the existence of God is answered in the same way as any other factual question, mistakenly reduces the theistic question to the same level as a box of crackers in the pantry, which we will hereafter call the crackers in the pantry fallacy. Secondly, then I'd like to talk about the presuppositional conflict of worldviews. Dr. Stein has written about the nature of evidence in the theistic debate, and what he has said points to a second philosophical error of significant proportions. In passing, we would note how unclear he is, by the way, in speaking of the evidence which must be used, describing it variously as logic, facts, or reason. Each of these terms is susceptible to a whole host of differing senses, not only in philosophy, but especially in ordinary usage, depending on who's using the terms. I take it he wishes to judge hypotheses in the common sense by a test of logical coherence and empirical observation. The problem arises when Dr. Stein elsewhere insists that every claim which someone makes must be treated as a hypothesis which must be tested by such evidence before accepting it.
There you go. Bahnsen just nailed him on the presuppositional conflict of worldviews by pointing out that Dr. Stein doesn't keep to his own strictures. And every atheist does the exact same thing, right? So remember, so the first point was the crackers in the pantry fallacy, right? The nature of evidence, right? Assuming that all things are proven in the same way and not allowing for, which all atheists do allow for in their own worldviews, different things to be proven in different ways, different types of things to be proven in different ways. So now we move to the presuppositional conflict of worldviews, ultimately that there's not any neutrality, and he's going to call Stein out for a fundamental paradigmatic level inconsistency. What's the claim? Every atheist does this too. Logic, facts, and reason are what we use to determine truth and falsehood, right? Everything must be judged by logic, facts, and reason. Now, first of all, Bahnsen is correct to point out that these are not unambiguous terms in the history of debate, philosophy, and Western civilization. I'm not saying that we're relativists and that there's no such thing as logic, facts, or reason. But what I'm saying is that these low IQ atheists act like everybody has the same conception of what logic, facts, and reason are. No, I'm sorry, but that's not true, right? What Hume conceives of as logic is not the same thing as what Hegel conceives of as logic. Two very different things, and yet they use logic, facts, and reason all the time. If you're an idealist, a fact is something very different to what John Locke thinks a fact is. What is reason? Is reason a faculty for attaining the essences of things? Or is reason ultimately some Darwinian survival mechanism, you see? Terms and concepts are theory-laden. They're not theory-neutral. Then this is why classical foundationalism fails. This is why they can't have a coherent argument, a coherent apologetic, and a coherent response to the challenges to their presuppositions, because they don't think presuppositionally. They think in terms of simple, properly basic maxims. And then when people come along to challenge the properly basic maxims and their presuppositions, they can't adequately answer it because they assume neutrality. There is no neutrality. It's not because of total depravity, by the way, that there's no neutrality. This is where we would reject the Calvinist view. There's no neutrality because all facts in the world are what they are in the mind of God and because God created them. We would agree with the Calvinists on that point. Then the Calvinists turn around, they say, and there's no neutrality because every man is totally depraved. No. Total depravity is not the issue. The issue is, yes, man has fallen and man is in rebellion against God, Romans 1, but he misinterprets the world because of the fall and his clouded news, and because there's no such thing as uninterpreted ideas like telos or causality. Telos or causality are what they are within a system, within a worldview, you see. So logic, facts, and reason, the next point, is what he says. Every belief, every statement and proposition must be tested according to logic, facts, reason, and of course with Gordon Stein, we can say empirical data. Really? Every belief? What about the belief that every belief must be proven through empirical sense data, facts, logic, and reason? Is that proven by empirical sense data, facts, logic, and reason? No, because it's not possible to prove that proposition as a universal truth claim. Obviously, right? You would have to have universal knowledge to be able to prove that, and it's impossible. In fact, Stein will actually admit that nobody can prove such universal claims. You can't prove a universal claim, nor can you prove a universal negative. That's what Stein's actually going to begin his response to Bahnsen with. He's going to say, atheism doesn't argue for no God. It argues that there's no convincing argument for a God, and therefore nobody can prove a universal negative. By the way, that's a universal negative. The IQ bar is dropping. No one can prove a universal negative. Oh, that's a universal negative. Oh. So the claim that all beliefs must be tested with empirical facts, data, logic, and reason is a claim that goes outside of empirical facts, logic, and reason. So Bahnsen has done a brilliant presuppositional critique of the starting point, of the grounding autonomous starting point. This is what Stein wants to be his basic starting point. And Stein's basically saying, if you give me this, I will refute you. But this is where we all start. We all have to start here. And Bahnsen's saying, really? But you don't adhere to this. You don't actually start here. You say, let's start with logic, facts, and reason, and only believe what we can test with empirical sense data. But then when I ask you, is the belief that we should only follow empirical sense data tested by logic, facts, and reason, you will say no. It's our starting point. That is a contradiction. Now, it's not a contradiction in our system because we don't reject circularity at a paradigmatic level. At the worldview level, we accept circularity, and that's why we are not classical foundationalists. We are not basic bitch empiricists. We allow for circularity at a paradigmatic level because we think it's unavoidable. At a certain level, as you get down, you can't appeal outside of the things that you're appealing to. There's no other higher authority, no other place to go, right? For example, logic. Logic ultimately becomes circular. How do you justify logic? You can't justify logic without appealing to logic. And so the only way to justify logic would be to point out that the denial of logic leads to absurdity. In other words, an indirect reductio argument. But that's a form of argument, and it's a form of justification. A reductio impossibility of the contrary argument, which is what we saw from St. John Damascus, is a valid argument for justifying a claim at a paradigmatic level. But what it shows is that at that level, it's circular. Could you explain to me words without referring to words? It's not possible. Do we therefore toss out words because, we can't justify words? It's circular. You do a circular argument, bro. No, that's dumb. But what it does show is that whether it's logic or whether it's words or whether other topics as well, as Bahnsen is going to point out, there's a certain level at which you can't get around circularity. And this is what the classical foundationalists have missed and not understood.
There is to be nothing, he says, which smacks of begging the question or circular reasoning. This, I think, is oversimplified thinking and again misleading, what we might call the pretended neutrality fallacy. One can see this by considering the following quotation from Dr. Stein, and I quote, "The use of logic or reason is the only valid way to examine the truth or falsity of a statement which claims to be factual." That's the end of the quote. One must eventually ask Dr. Stein then how he proves this statement itself. That is, how does he prove that logic or reason is the only way to prove factual statements? He's now on the horns of a real epistemological dilemma. If he says that the statement is proven by logic or reason, then he's engaging in circular reasoning and he's begging the question, which he staunchly forbids. If he says that the statement is proven in some other fashion, then he refutes the statement itself, that logic or reason is the only way to prove.
His system forbids. His system forbids circularity at that level because he's operating on the same classical foundationalist, empiricist type of worldview as everybody else is, except us. We don't have that. We recognize circularity at the paradigmatic level.
Things. Now, my point is not to fault Dr. Stein's commitment to logic or reason, but to observe that it actually has the nature of a pre-commitment or a presupposition. It is not something he has proven by empirical experiential logic, but it is rather that by which he proceeds to prove everything else. He is not presuppositionally neutral in his approach to factual questions and disputes. He does not avoid begging crucial questions rather than proving them in what we might call the garden variety, ordinary way. Now, this tendency to beg crucial questions is openly exposed by Dr. Stein when the issue becomes the existence of God, because he demands that the theists present him with evidence for the existence of God. Now, theists like myself would gladly and readily do so. There is the evidence of the created order itself, testifying to the wisdom, power, plan, and glory of God. One should not miss the testimony of the solar system, the persuasion of the sea, the amazing intricacies of the human body. There's the evidence of history, God's deliverance of his people, the miracles at Passover night in the Red Sea, the visions of Isaiah, the Shekinah glory in the temple, the virgin birth of Jesus, his mighty miracles, his resurrection from the dead. There's the evidence of special revelation, the wonder of the Bible as God's Word, unsurpassed in its coherence over time, in its historical accuracy, and its life-renewing power. In short, there is no shortage of empirical indicators or evidences of God's existence, from the 1,000 stars of the heavens to the 500 witnesses of Christ's resurrection. But Dr. Stein precludes the very possibility of any of this empirical evidence counting as proof of God's existence. He writes, and now I quote, "Supernatural explanations are not allowed in science. The theist is hard put to document his claims to the existence of the supernatural if he is, in effect, forbidden from invoking the supernatural as a part of his explanation. Of course, this is entirely fair, as it would be begging the question to use what has to be proved as a part of the explanation." End of quote. In advance, you see, Dr. Stein is committed to disallowing any theistic interpretation of nature, history, or experience. What he seems to overlook is that this is just as much begging the question on his own part as it is on the part of the theists who appeal to such evidence.
So this is where Bahnsen is hammering home the point that evidences do not come to us as brute facts. They do not come to us uninterpreted. This is a really common philosophical assumption since the late Middle Ages up into the Enlightenment. They all had the assumption that there's just brute facts. Like you just go out there and you look at the thing and you list the properties and then you know the thing, right? Whether it's an earthworm or whether it's, you're building a house or whatever, it doesn't matter. Science is just simply listing the properties of a thing and it just comes to you. It just imprints itself upon you, as if there's not an interpretive framework and schema in the mind of man that also goes into interpreting and analyzing and categorizing the sense data impressions that come into our mind. So you'll notice that a lot of the assumptions of everybody from the Thomists all the way up into the Enlightenment characters, they all have this assumption, classical foundationalism, this kind of basic empiricist assumption that man is a blank slate, more or less. Aquinas more or less thinks that man is a blank slate. And everything that he knows is just what's been imprinted upon us from the external. But we know, and by the way, we can show that. I have grad papers on Alvin Noé's book, Action and Perception, where we actually have, people have actually demonstrated now that there's actually a symbiotic relationship between the sense data impressing upon us and the mind interpreting things. So Kant was actually kind of right about that, in that the mind does interpret and give a schema to the phenomenal impressions that come to us. I'm not saying Kantianism is correct. We're not Kantians. But he's right that it's not just a matter of receiving sense data. The mind categorizes and puts together and interprets the data. Now, when I say that the mind interprets the data, does that mean that, it's all relative and nobody knows what's true? No, some of our minds correctly interpret the data and the sense impressions. We're not talking about that. We're talking about different notions of epistemology and, what was that? I had a grad class on this. It was really good. philosophy of philosophy of perception. That was it. And we did all the way from the ancient world to the Enlightenment philosophers to Husserl, Heidegger, the phenomenologists. Philosophy of perception. It was a great, one of my best grad classes, because we got really deep into all these questions about how we actually interpret data. And most of the time in the history of Western philosophy, it's always either ors, right? You get the empiricists, oh, it's all just sense data. Or you get the German idealists, oh, it's all the mind, right? It's all just mental ideals. I mean, this is silly. The mind is a mind in Christian Orthodox metaphysics, philosophy, that does receive sense data, but it's not just mind and sense data. We also have other faculties. We have the nous. We also have more than just material sense data. We have essences. Things have natures. We do directly perceive and understand the natures of things. Doesn't mean that we know everything about the natures of things, but we are given, because we're made in the image of God, we have the ability, the faculty to have a realist perception of things in the external world, right? Of the essences and natures of things. And so our philosophy, our metaphysics, our worldview avoids a lot of the problems that are present in all these atheistic systems, because they've tossed out all the theology and the metaphysics and the worldview, and they try to build everything up from the bottom up. They try to build all of everything up from just human sense perception, which is totally stupid and utterly impossible, and that's why it leads to total skepticism. David Hume is the end result of empiricism.
He has not at all proven by empirical observation and logic his pre-commitment to naturalism. He has assumed it in advance, accepting and rejecting all further factual claims in terms of that controlling and unproven assumption. Now, the theist does the very same thing, don't get me wrong. When certain empirical evidences are put forth as allegedly disproving the existence of God, the theist regiments his commitments in terms of his presuppositions as well. See, just as the naturalist would insist that Christ could not have risen from the dead, or that there is a natural explanation yet to be found of how he did rise from the dead, so the supernaturalist insists that the alleged discrepancies in the Bible have an explanation, some yet to be found perhaps, and that the evil of this world has a sufficient reason behind it, known at least to God.
This is an important point, because Bahnsen is responding to the bad arguments for theism or for Christianity by saying that, look, we're not going to just argue that Jesus was resurrected. Look how the apostles changed their attitude from before to after the resurrection. Therefore, Christianity is true. That's a bad argument. Now, if you're a Christian, that's convincing to you. If you're a Christian, you look at the world and you hear about first cause. Yeah, of course God's the first cause. But it's not convincing if that's your starting point, because it assumes the Christian worldview, right? Just because a guy rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, how does that mean that Christianity is true? It's only true within the framework of Christian presuppositions, within the interpretive schema of the rest of Christianity. Because there are Buddhists who change their attitude, right? They go from being, wimpy to being willing to die for Buddhism, right? The apostles went from being wimpy to willing to die. How does that prove Christianity? It's a bad argument. It doesn't prove Christianity. And so the point is that the atheist, all he's going to do is take those, when you spit those so-called evidences out, all he's going to do is reinterpret it according to the framework of his presuppositions. He's going to say, well, crazy things happen. We just haven't found a solution yet to that. Science one day will find a solution to why it is 2,000 years ago, some guy who maybe didn't even exist. Maybe it's just made up. Or if he did rise from the dead, well, maybe he was just passed out for 3 days and they didn't have the sufficient science at the time to know whether he was alive or dead. Point is that those are dumb arguments. You're going to waste your whole years and years and years. And yes, I understand sometimes God converts people. Sometimes people are converted with bad arguments. But that doesn't matter, right? We don't justify the position just because it works. We want to use argumentation and apologetic that's in line with the rest of our theology. The rest of our theology doesn't argue for generic theism. It doesn't allow for the autonomy of man. It doesn't say God possibly exists. And all those dumb classical arguments end up saying maybe, probably there's a God. Does God say maybe, probably there's a God? No, he says there absolutely is a God. So our theology has to be in line with our apologetic. Know for of a certain, Peter says, that Christ has risen from the dead and God has confirmed him. Know of a certain. So notice also, we don't reject evidences. But the thing is that the problem with the atheist perspective is that it's not a lack of evidences, right? We note here at the bottom of my notes here on this section, we're still in part 2. The problem isn't evidence, right? There's no lack of evidence for the position. But the problem is that the atheist wears rose-colored glasses, and he's always going to interpret the evidence according to his presuppositions, his naturalistic presuppositions. So it doesn't matter what things you throw at him, and yes, God can open people's hearts, but that doesn't mean that the arguments are valid because people change their hearts on the basis of bad argumentation. The problem isn't a lack of facts. You can stack the facts up all day long. The person is going to interpret the facts according to his theory, his schema, his worldview, his paradigm, his presuppositions, his assumptions. So why not just go to the presupposition itself? Challenge the assumptions. It's a much better, a much stronger, and a much more devastating apologetic argument. Again, we don't have a problem with evidences. We just recognize that, typically speaking, especially if it's an intelligent atheist, they're just going to interpret the evidence according to their governing presuppositions. In this case, with Gordon Stein, it's naturalism. And we want to take a brief stop here and point out that Romans 1 is not...
They both have their governing presuppositions by which the facts of...
The point is that we all have governing presuppositions. And we're all going to interpret facts according to our paradigms and our worldview. So one way to demonstrate our view, right, is to look at Romans 1, and we're going to point out that Paul is not teaching natural theology. There's nothing in Romans 1 about syllogisms from Aristotle. This is the assumption and the stupid hermeneutic of Thomism and Roman Catholicism. Paul doesn't say anything about doing a causal chain argument back to an unmoved mover. In fact, he does the opposite. He says that everybody knows deep down in their heart of hearts, their nous, that there's one true God and that they have sinned against him. It has nothing to do with philosophical causal chain arguments in Romans 1. And every Thomist natural theological exposition of Romans 1, that's what they say. They actually think Paul's talking about Aquinas's 5 ways. No, he's not. That's utterly stupid. Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes it, for the Jew and also for the Greek. Notice how Paul's not interested. He doesn't have to, he's just going to say, it's true. You have to believe it. It is the power of God. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, that just shall live by faith. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all of the ungodly and all unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest through Aristotelian reasoning and syllogisms? No. In them. What may be known of God is manifest immediately in them, interiorly, in their heart, their nous, their heart of hearts. There's nothing in this section about natural theology or Thomistic syllogisms or arguments from contingency or arguments from causes. It's an immediacy that deals with direct revelation. That's why it's natural revelation, not natural theology. Since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen. There's no lack of evidence. Every classical argument, every classical theist type of position tries to go to the unbeliever and present lists of facts and philosophical categories as if all we need is to just unload before this dude a bunch of facts and then he'll eventually interpret them right. No, he needs to repent. You can't interpret the data right until you repent. That's the point. Even God's eternal power and Godhead are made manifest so that all men are without excuse. How could all men be without excuse if there wasn't a direct revelation to the heart of hearts of all men that they're guilty before God? If it was about Thomistic and Aristotelian syllogisms and causal chains, how are all men guilty? Are 13-year-olds who don't know anything about syllogistic reasoning back to first cause guilty? No, that's idiotic. Paul's not talking about a PhDs in Aristotelian logic being guilty. All men are guilty. He says they're without excuse. Because although they knew God, they didn't glorify him as God. Paul says all men, deep down, know that they have rebelled against God. They know because they're made in the image of God. And we all have an innate sense of right and wrong and what the Ten Commandments encapsulates. Because all men descend from Adam. The Ten Commandments is nothing but an encapsulation of the law of God given to Adam. The Ten Commandments is an expansion of that basic principle of love God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. If you do that, you won't violate the worship of God. You won't worship idols. You won't have other gods. You won't rape and kill your neighbors. But all men have failed to do this because they know deep down in their heart of hearts, which is the nous, that they are wrong. And then he goes on to say that they became futile in their thoughts and their hearts were darkened. Their nous was darkened. Not syllogistic reasoning. Their hearts were darkened. The nous. And they became fools. Paul says pagan wisdom is foolishness. They're fools. They're not smart. Professing to be wise, they became fools and they changed the glory of God into dumb idols. Now, does that mean that everything they say is wrong? No. In Acts 17, when Paul does his apologetic, he cites pagan philosophers and poets. Sure, nothing wrong with that. Because we're not saying that everything they said was wrong. We're saying that when it comes to God, they are wrong. They are wrong when it comes to God. That's where they became the fools. So why would we go to them for the way to argue about God? It's just idiotic. God therefore gave them over to the lust of their flesh to dishonor their bodies. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator. For this reason, God gave them over to their vile passions. And then he talks about unnatural things. The men and the women left the natural action, and they received in themselves the penalty of the error. Since they did not like to retain the knowledge of God, God gave them over to a debased mind. They had the knowledge of God, and they rebelled against him, and God gave them over to pagan idiocy, lunacy, disgustingness, degeneracy. And then he lists all the great sins of the pagan world. All unrighteousness, immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness, whispering, backbiting, hating God, violent, proud, boasting, inventing new evil things, disobedience to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who know the righteous judgment of God. They even know the righteous judgment of God, that they are guilty. And that those who practice these things are worthy of death. Paul supports the death penalty. They not only do these things, but they approve of the people who do them. So absolutely nothing in Romans 1 about natural theology and the syllogistic reasoning of Aristotle. No teleological argument, no causal argument, no argument from contingencies, no ontological argument. It's a statement of moral corruption and decay, and that in man's heart of hearts, he's in rebellion. That's why the problem with the atheist is not a lack of evidence and a lack of facts. It's pride and lack of repentance. And that's why you can't interpret the world correctly until you repent. Does that mean that everything you say is wrong about the world? No, of course not. We're talking about interpreting the world on the big metaphysical, theological scale. We're not talking about you can't interpret the world correctly and that you can't write a science paper and get the facts right about the earthworm. Sure, of course you can. But we're not talking about that, because ultimately, even on the earthworm, you're wrong, because you think the earthworm just is, right? You don't believe that the earthworm is a created earthworm that comes ultimately from God and has its meaning ultimately in the Logos. That's what we believe, you see. Causation, telos, ontology, those things mean what they mean in our worldview because of Christ. And the Roman Catholics don't get this. They have no idea what you're talking about.
Experience or interpreted, even as all philosophical systems, all worldviews do. At the most fundamental level of everyone's thinking and beliefs, there are primary convictions about reality, man, the world, knowledge, truth, behavior, and such things. Convictions about which all other experience is organized, interpreted, and applied. Dr. Stein has such presuppositions, and so do I, and so do all of you. And it is these presuppositions which determine what we accept by ordinary reasoning and evidence, for they are assumed in all of our reasoning, even about reasoning itself. And so I come thirdly then to the transcendental proof of God's existence. How then should the difference of opinion between the theist and the atheist be rationally resolved? That was my opening question. We've seen two of Dr. Stein's errors regarding it: the crackers in the pantry fallacy and the pretended neutrality fallacy. In the process of discussing them, we have observed that belief in the existence of God is not tested in any ordinary way like other factual claims. And the reason for that is metaphysically because of the non-natural character of God, and epistemologically because of the presuppositional character of commitment for or against his existence. Arguments over conflicting presuppositions between worldviews, therefore, must be resolved somewhat differently, and yet still rationally, than conflicts over factual existence claims within a worldview or system of thoughts.
So Bahnsen's point is just simply that the real crux of debate between the atheist and the Christian theist is conflicting paradigms. It's not a conflicting list of facts. It's not who can stack up the most facts and we'll put it in the scale. Oh, we got 75 facts over here and you got 23 facts, bro. So the scale's pointing our direction, and 25% that there's atheism, 75% that there's God. We win, bro. That's dumb. That's not how it works. It's two different paradigms, worldviews, and that's why when we look at what a paradigm or worldview is, our governing presuppositions, our governing assumptions about the world, that's what goes into being compared. Two different systems, right? We're going to compare two systems. This is what we've been talking about. And this is such a better argument. I mean, the people who are going against us, they're just missing out on what would be a much stronger, better argumentation. Why would you prefer? It's like the diet thing. It's like I want the least optimal diet because I feel like I'm going to eat a bunch of sugar because I feel good. Why would you want the least optimal diet? And so what we're going to do, and what Bahnsen's going to do is, and maybe not so much in this talk, but in other talks or in many talks you've heard me do, is compare two different paradigms. What is the ethic? What is the ontology or metaphysics? And what is the epistemology of these two different views? And then what we'll see is that in theology, in our theology, the ethic, the ontology, and the epistemology are coherent. They're consistent. They make sense. They're rational. They're reasonable within our paradigm based on the assumptions of our paradigm. When we compare that, what we have, and we compare it to the system of the atheist, we'll see that it is completely incoherent. It is in each of the branches of philosophy. Let's look at it this way. We're going to compare the two paradigms because that's ultimately what we're debating, is not lists of facts, but two different paradigms. In our ethic, right? Our ethic is grounded in a revealed ethic, not just in terms of the Ten Commandments, but what's in Scripture and then what is revealed to man in terms of his heart, right? We know the law of God on our hearts, and that law of God matches up with the Ten Commandments and the law of God in Scripture, which is the same as the teaching of Christ. So we have a revealed ethic, right? And we don't fall into the Euthyphro dilemma of whether something's right because God said it, or is it what God said that makes it right, because there's a sense in which both are true, because what God says is a reflection of his own holy character. So the revealed ethic that we have is based on that man is made in the image of God. It's not that God just arbitrarily states things are right or wrong and then he changes his mind. No, the 10 Commandments were true in the garden and they're still true today. It's the same ethic, the same revealed ethic. And when we say natural law, if that's what you mean, the revealed right and wrong in terms of what God's nature is, yes, then we would agree with natural law. If natural law means what Thomas Aquinas says, a natural theology, that you can just look out at nature and reason up to a generic first cause, no, that's not, we don't believe that. And that's why the logi doctrine is not the same as the doctrine of exemplarism in Roman Catholicism. The atheist ontology or metaphysic is that, ours is that reality is a created reality. Now, created reality is not the only reality, but we acknowledge two realities, created reality and uncreated reality. Of course, God himself is the uncreated reality, and he's also created a world, which is a created world, and that world has its meaning in terms of what God says it is, in terms of who God is. And it's grounded in our epistemology. Our knowledge of the world is grounded in the fact that not only are we made in God's image, but we can also learn about the world because we have faculties that God has given us being made like God. We can understand and conceptualize, reason about, and act in the world. And ultimately, we have the ability to be like God, right? So theosis is kind of a higher level of what each one of these things. We become like God in terms of our ethics. We become like God in terms of our participation in divine life. And we become like God in terms of knowing Christ directly. So ultimately, we do have a form of divine conceptualism. You could call it that. Of course, we want to distinguish it from Platonism or from William Lane Craig's divine conceptualism because it's not. Because the problems that they have, whether it's the Roman Catholic or the Protestant, if they have a form of divine conceptualism, it's a form of Platonism. We have a form of uncreated energies. That's what the logi are, right? Divine conceptualism based on the logi of St. Maximus. That is a unique, different doctrine than the Protestants or the Roman Catholics. So that's our worldview. That's our system. That's our philosophical position, you could say. And it is informed, obviously, by our theology. It's not done through some secular reasoning. It's informed by our theology. I mean, even John Damascus says theology is the queen of the sciences, right? And in this sense, this is how he means it. Now, when we look at the atheist worldview down here, the ethic is relative. Obviously, there's absolutely no way to have an objective, absolutist ethic in atheism. I'm not even aware of any of them that would argue there is. Maybe there's some atheist materialist who somewhere argues that there's an objective, absolute ethic. I've never heard of that, but I'm sure somebody could dig up some outlier somewhere. But it wouldn't matter because, typically speaking, the position is purely relativistic, and so it can't even get off the ground in terms of explaining. And by the way, aren't they oftentimes the most rabid moralizers? Of course they are. They're always rabidly moralizing about how this is wrong and injustices and this and that. And Christianity's mean, God's mean. Oh, but wait a minute. Ethics are subjective. But God is mean and he's wrong, bro. He's wrong to do that. Why is it wrong? What does it mean to be wrong? Especially if you have a relativistic, subjectivist ethic. In ontology, when you come to the question of justifying claims, justifying the external world, making sense of the world, talking about what exists, what doesn't exist, what is existence, it just is. It just is. It always is. We don't know. It always is. So we have another skeptical view of ontology, sometimes an outright denial of metaphysics and ontology, typically. And they just fall back on, well, I don't have to answer those questions because the world just is. It just is. So when you ask them metaphysical questions, they can fall back like Matt Dillahunty did in my debate with him. They just say, well, it just is. I don't have to justify it. It just is. Oh, well, then I say God just is. Oh, nope. You got to justify your claims. Oh, but now wait a minute, Matt. Let me ask you about justifying your claims. How do you justify belief in the laws of logic? Oh, they just are. I don't have to. That's called being ad hoc. And they don't even know what it means to justify claims. They don't know what you're talking about. Epistemology for the atheist, also relativistic, right? Or it's autonomous, right? In other words, what we do with divine conceptualism, where we have a form of it with the logi and how we ground things in reality in the mind of God, the atheist does this in the mind of man, right? They transfer our view of the mind of God and they smush it into the autonomous, fleeting, meaningless mind of man. What is man in this worldview, though? Well, he's just a drop in the ocean of an infinite sea of limitless materialism and meaninglessness and nihilism. So it means absolutely nothing. And that's why ultimately it doesn't matter what you say in terms of epistemology and trying to ground things in the mind of man and reason, because man's reasoning is just a chemical process of blind chance. It doesn't mean anything. So you see, this is a better way to argue that this paradigm up here, the Christian paradigm, is coherent. It makes sense. It's consistent. You may not like it, but it's not incoherent. It's not irrational. It's not inconsistent. It actually makes sense of the three branches of philosophy. It makes sense of how there can be ethics, metaphysics, epistemology, right? And because man is made in the image of God, he's a personal being, he can do these things in the world. He has dignity. There's no dignity here. Ethics are completely relative and subjective. There's no way to ground anything. And by the way, they'll say, yeah, you can. We can ground it. They don't know what it means to ground and justify beliefs. They'll just restate things. Or they'll be arbitrary and ad hoc, and they don't even know why that's invalid reasoning, right? There's no metaphysic here. They just say it is. The world just is. It's all just matter. Even though on their own view, you can't even know that all there is matter. They'll still just say that. And Stein's going to do that too, by the way. Epistemology, relative and autonomous. So there you go. So that's the two comparison paradigms that we have. So let's let Bahnsen finish up his point.
When we go to look at the different worldviews that atheists and theists have, I suggest that we can prove the existence of God from the impossibility of the contrary. The transcendental proof for God's existence is that without him, it is impossible to prove anything. The atheist worldview is irrational and cannot consistently provide the preconditions of intelligible experience, science, logic, or morality.
So there you go. You just heard Bahnsen list the things that I have listed for you, which is that the atheist worldview cannot give a coherent account of these things, and therefore, if these things are true, then the atheist worldview cannot do ethics, it cannot do metaphysics, and it cannot reason. That is the argument. If our worldview is true, it shows how we can do ethics, metaphysics, and reasoning. That is the argument. Compare that one with that one. That's the transcendental argument. Is that clear enough? Do you guys see? Because every time we do this, every time we talk about it, it's not an argument. Where's the argument, bro? I don't see an argument. You just state the view. You just be you just say God's a presupposition. There ain't no argument there. This is the argument. The argument is this paradigm does not match with that paradigm. And for this paradigm to even argue requires our paradigm. That's the argument.
The atheist worldview cannot allow for laws of logic, the uniformity of nature, the ability for the mind to understand the world, and moral absolutes. And in that sense, the atheist worldview cannot account for our debate tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Bahnsen, for the opening statement. We now turn to...
In other words, if atheism is true, then you can't debate, because debate presupposes laws of logic. Laws of logic are not material, and you can't justify them or ground them in a nonsense materialist worldview.
You, Dr. Stein, your 15-minute opening statement, please.
Can everybody hear me? I assume so.
Well, I don't like it, Jay. You don't like what? You don't like arguments? Do you know an argument doesn't mean fighting with your wife? That's an argument. An argument in philosophy means a true proposition, a true claim, a true syllogism. What do you mean you don't like it? Oh, okay. Good. He's being sarcastic.
Well, I will grant Dr. Bahnsen his expertise on a conditional resolution of the apparent paradox of self-deception, which was his dissertation.
So here is Stein coming back with his opening rejoinder, and he's trying to poison the well back against Bahnsen and saying that because Bahnsen wrote his PhD on self-deception, that Bahnsen is self-deceived. which is ironic because actually Bahnsen's PhD would apply more to Gordon Stein and the self-deception involved in atheism.
I don't know how much more relevant that is to our discussion tonight than mine is, probably not anymore. But I would like to also thank Dr. Bahnsen for showing us that he really doesn't understand too much about atheism. I will try to straighten him out. This is an important question we're discussing. Perhaps it's the most important question in the whole field of religion. Because if God does not exist, then the Bible can't be the Word of God, Jesus can't be the Messiah, and Christianity cannot be true as well as other religions. So we're dealing with an important issue here. Now, Dr. Bahnsen repeated for me that the existence of God is a factual question. I don't think he would dispute that. I think he misinterpreted what I said when I said that we solve factual questions in the same way. I didn't mean exactly the same way. I mean but the use of reason, logic, and evidence. And that is what I'm holding. Now, first let me make clear what atheism is and is not. I think this is a very commonly misunderstood subject. Atheists do not say that they can prove that there's no God. An atheist is not someone who denies that there is a God. Rather, an atheist says that he has examined the proofs that are offered by the theist, and he finds them inadequate. Now, if I were to say that this gentleman sitting on the front step could fly by flapping his arms, I would be making a kind of unusual statement. And it would be up to me or him to demonstrate that he could fly. If he can't demonstrate it, then we don't believe that he can fly. Now, if he doesn't demonstrate it right now, that doesn't mean he can't fly. It just means he can't fly right now. Now, so that we do not deny that he can fly because he can't demonstrate it right now, but we say he has not proven his case. And therefore, we do not believe that he can fly until he does so, prove so. And this is what an atheist says about the existence of God. He says the case is unproven, not disproven. So an atheist is really someone who is without a belief in God or who does not believe in a God. It is not someone who denies the existence of a God or who says that one does not exist or can prove that one does not exist. Now, I think I would like to define a God as well. I'm not so sure I like his definition. I'm not going to stick to just Christian God. I'm going to stick to all kinds of God. And I'm going to use the definition which both Father Copleston and Bertrand Russell both agreed on in their famous debate. Now, this was both sides, the leading exponents of both sides, both managed to agree on a definition of God, so I think it must be at least an adequate one, if not a great one. And this is the definition: a supreme personal being, distinct from the world and creator of the world. Now, before asking for proof of God's existence, we need this satisfactory definition. And I think I've given one which I will find at least satisfactory, and if Dr. Bahnsen doesn't agree, we can hear from him. Now, nothing can qualify as evidence for the existence of a God unless we have some idea what we're searching for. That's why we need the definition. Just a second. Okay, now, throughout history, 11 major kinds of evidence or proof have been offered for the existence of God. In my campus visits, I have heard all kinds of other things offered as proof, but they basically fall into those 11 categories with some juggling. And if these 11 proofs do not work out logically, or lead to logical self-contradictions, then we can only say that God's existence is not proved. It's unproven, not disproven, as I mentioned before. Now, if I assert that this gentleman can fly by flapping his arms, as I said, the burden of proof was on him. Supposing I make a more complicated statement. Supposing I say that...
Now, this is a bit of sophistry here, because this is what you'll see the atheists do this all the time, where they'll be like, nobody can prove a universal negative, and then they'll be like, we're not arguing that there is no God, when they absolutely argue all the time that there's no God. So this is some sophistry here. And he cites the Smith book, The Case Against God, which is a case for atheism. The word atheism means no God, right? So this is just sophistry of trying to say, well, gotcha, because we don't actually say there's no God. We just say you can't know if there's a God, and we've not seen convincing evidence yet. And yet they turn around and they will constantly use the language of and the dogmatic affirmation that there's no God. And so this is just kind of linguistic sophistry.
My dog can talk in complete sentences. Okay, well, again, I'm making a kind of unusual statement, and it's up to me to offer the evidence. So I'd better be prepared to do that, or I'd better be prepared to have people not believe what I say. And I'd like a demonstration, either of this gentleman's flying or of my dog talking, if I were the person who was being asked to make a conclusion, before I admitted that such things were possible or existed. Okay, now how easy would it be to show that this gentleman cannot fly or that my dog cannot talk in complete sentences? As I mentioned before, we get into a real problem when we're trying to show that something cannot happen or that something does not exist. For example, if I wanted to prove that unicorns do not exist, I can examine this room and we can find out that there are definitely no unicorns in this room. That's a small area. But to prove the general non-existence of something like unicorns, we would have to search the entire universe simultaneously, and then we could only say that no unicorns existed at the moment we searched the universe. But, maybe they were there 5 minutes before, or if we only searched the whole Earth, maybe they were on another planet at the time. I mean, there are all kinds of other possibilities. So you cannot prove that something does not exist. And that's why, as I mentioned before, the definition of an atheist is not someone who thinks he has proven that God does not exist, because you cannot. Okay, now of those 11 major proofs, I'm going to go over some of them very quickly. They've been 900 years in the formulation, and during this 900 years, this is...
By the way, so yeah, he could have just cut to the chase and said a universal negative. I mean, come on, do you not know the term? But by the way, no one can prove something doesn't exist is a universal negative, so he refuted himself again.
This is basically what people have come up with. The first cause argument, also called the cosmological argument, it says that everything must have a cause.
Isn't this funny? Because Stein's whole response goes through classical dumb arguments and don't address any argument that Bahnsen gave. It's like he wasn't even in the debate. And Bahnsen will actually call him out for this and be like, well, Dr. Stein's not in the debate yet.
Therefore, the universe had a cause, and that cause was God. God was the first or uncaused cause. Okay, well, this leads into a real logical bind for the theist, because if everything must have had a cause, then God must have had a cause.
This, I will give credit to him for this, because this does show the flaw in the classical argumentation for cosmology, right? Number one, I mean, there's multiple problems with the traditional formulation. And again, the people who don't understand our point, they think that we're arguing against causality, or they think that you can't talk about causation or causality. You can. The problem is that you can't use it as a starting point in an argument as if that was more clear than the existence of God, or more certain than the existence of God. And that's what all classical argumentation, classical foundationalism does. It doesn't work to say everything has a cause and then jump to the therefore God is first cause. Now, am I saying that God isn't the first cause? Of course not. But I'm saying that this is an invalid movement in logic. And it doesn't matter that all the trads and all the Thomists are like, bro, you just repeating the atheist. That's a genetic fallacy. It doesn't matter if I'm repeating an atheist if the argument and the point is correct. You can't move from everything having a cause in the natural world and then making God the exception, because this assumes the thing that you're trying to prove. I mean, it's not that difficult. And that is a valid point. And you can argue all day that you think I'm secretly atheist or whatever you want to say. That's an invalid movement. You can't move from a series of natural events to a supernatural first cause when you've started and assumed only natural events. Now, a Christian does that, and a Christian does believe that God is the supernatural first cause. But in argumentation and logic, you can't assume the thing that you're trying to prove in classical foundationalist argumentation. And that's what all these dumb classical arguments do. They assume the thing they're trying to prove. They're only convincing to people who already believe in God. Do you not see that? Number one, how do you know everything has a cause? How do you know everything has a single cause? How do you know that God who you think is the first cause isn't multiple gods? So this dumb argument requires a whole bunch of other, well, let me have this, and let me have this point, and let me have this point. Let me have about 10 other points, and then I can prove to you that God is the first cause. I mean, it's just childish.
If God had a cause, then he was not the first or uncaused cause. If God did not have a cause, then not everything must have a cause. If not everything needs a cause, then perhaps the universe is one of those things which doesn't need a cause. So you see that we've gotten into a logical bind there, and that proof basically fails. Now, I'm giving you a real short synopsis of each of these proofs. They can fill an entire book in half. So you have to understand I'm oversimplifying slightly, but I think I'm retaining the logic of it, both the pro and con. The second one is the design argument, also called the teleological argument. It says that the universe is wonderful and exhibits evidence of design or order. Things which show such wonderful design must have had a designer who was even more wonderful, and that designer was God. Well, if the universe is wonderfully designed, surely God is even more wonderfully designed. He must therefore have had a designer even more wonderful than he is.
Once again, Stein is correct, because if we start our argumentation by saying everything except God has telos, or design or purpose, then we've already assumed the thing that we're trying to prove from the outset. Because every person who's a Christian, if they're using the teleological argument, wants to accept God. God is the exception to this proposition. Everything except God has design. Well, if everything has design and God is part of everything, then Stein's point is valid, and it's not a valid argument.
If God did not require a designer, then there's no reason why such a relatively less wonderful thing as the universe needed one. Again, we're into
Now, as Christians, we believe that the universe has design and that God is the designer, right? But we believe that because we believe the Christian worldview. And we have a way to interpret the natural world, not just by human autonomous reasoning, but by revealed theology. So when we look at the world, we don't see death and life as co-equal, co-eternal natural principles. That's what natural theology leads to. Death is just as real, just as natural as life. The natural world is full of death. It's full of the predator-prey relationship. Death for us as Orthodox is unnatural, because you need revealed theology. You need Genesis and the fall to properly interpret the world. And the world is fallen. The predator-prey relationship, death, has introduced its decay into the world because of the fall. That alone refutes Thomism and natural theology. That alone, that right there, that's all you need to refute it. Because no Thomist, no one in natural theology believes that you use revelation to interpret the natural world in natural theology. You don't start there. You tack that on later. You can look at the world apart from Scripture and reason back to a first cause and a designer. If I look at the world and I see death, decay, predator, and prey, then I think this designer is a psychopath. So I need revealed theology to tell me that the world is fallen. And no Thomist in the world believes that you can look out at the world and see that it's fallen apart from revelation. It's like I have to tell the Thomists what their theology is.
Logical self-contradiction. The argument from life says life cannot originate from the random movement of atoms, yet life exists. Therefore, the existence of a God was necessary to create life. Well, basically, life didn't originate from the random movements of atoms, and no scientist would say so.
I want to address this question. Isn't tag the same? Transcendentals exist, therefore transcendentals exist, namely God. Yeah, we're not saying that you can't use reasoning. We're not saying that what we're saying is that you have to start with God. So we're actually pointing to the unbeliever's worldview, and we're saying that what you're missing here in this system is God, and you can't get to God without repenting. That's why this system is more in line with the Bible and the way that Paul preaches and says, repent. Paul doesn't go to the unbelievers and throw out a bunch of syllogisms. He says, repent. That's what we do. We say repent because the natural world tells you about Jesus. And so, no, we are not just laying out a conceptual scheme. We're not doing a Kantian argument for conceptualism. We're doing an argument for worldviews being coherent or incoherent. So it is not the same as some just laying out a bunch of transcendentals and listing them as facts. A key part of our apologetic is to point out that you can't interpret the world unless you repent. Repent, unbeliever. That's part of our gospel and our apologetic. That's what Paul does in Acts 17. Our apologetic is the apologetic of Acts 17. Paul doesn't go and say, let me list for you the Kalam cosmological argument in Acts 17, and if I give you enough facts, maybe I can convince you to believe in generic theism, and then a year later I can tack on top of that the Trinity. We start with the Trinity, and the Thomists don't. That's why we're right and they're wrong.
Because there are limits on the chemical composition and physics of atoms, and they don't move in any possible way, and chemicals do not combine in any possible way. That's why when you see these 1 billion to 1 kind of odds that people have said for life originating, they're all wet. They haven't considered the possibility that not every reaction can occur. So it's possible to explain the origin of life without a God, and using the principle of parsimony or Occam's razor, I think we are left with the simpler explanation as the one without the God. I'll go into more detail on that later. Then we have the argument from revealed theology, which seems to be one of Dr. Bahnsen's favorites. It says that the Bible says that God exists, and the Bible is the inspired word of God. Therefore, what it says must be true. Therefore, God exists. Well, this is obviously a circular argument.
That's not what the transcendental argument is. I mean, he doesn't even understand the transcendental argument, and Bahnsen is going to call him out on this in the rebuttal because he thinks that we're just saying that the Bible says God exists. The Bible's true, therefore God exists because it's true. No, we're doing a form of argumentation called a transcendental argument that compares two worldviews, and it actually invalidates one of them, logically speaking, through incoherence. That's the argument, not just saying God said it, therefore it's true. Now, do we believe that it's true because God said it? Sure. But we're also giving an argument, and the problem is that most people don't understand that this is a kind of argument. People have a very hard time accepting and understanding that there's different types of arguments, different types of ways to prove different types of things. That's why we started this debate with the crackers in the pantry fallacy. Every atheist does the exact same thing. They assume, and they have to, actually, they're kind of required to maintain their position. They're almost required to have to force everything to be proven in the exact same way. That way they can lay upon the theist the impossible burden of a physical evidence for a non-physical being.
It begs the question. We're trying to show whether God exists, therefore calling the Bible the Word of God is not permitted because it assumes the existence of the very thing we're trying to prove. Now, if the Bible is not the Word of God, in this case, then we cannot give any real weight to the fact that it mentions that God exists. It does not become a proof. In fact, to prove God from the Bible is standing things on its head. First, you must prove God. Then you may say, examine whether God wrote the Bible or dictated it or inspired it. But you can't really use the Bible, as Dr. Bahnsen seems to want to do, as evidence for the existence of God, per se. Then we have the argument from miracles. It says that the existence of miracles requires the presence of a supernatural force, that is, a God. Miracles do occur, therefore there is a supernatural force or God. Again, this is begging the question. It requires that you must believe in the existence of a God first, beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. I like that comment in the chat. Stein is annihilating all of the straw men. He hasn't engaged Bahnsen yet. He's engaged all of these bad classical arguments that Bahnsen has not made any use of.
And then you say that there are such things as miracles, which are the acting of a God to create violations of his own laws. So it is not evidence per se. It can serve as supplementary. Once you've had good evidence in another kind of a way for the existence of a God, then you can use miracles as an additional argument. But in and of itself, it doesn't show the existence of a God because it assumes that which is to be proven. I just want to quote you one little thing from Thomas Paine about miracles. If we see an account given of such a miracle by a person who said he saw it, it raises a question in the mind that is very easily decided, which is it more probable that nature should go out of her course or that a man should tell a lie? We have never seen in our time nature go out of her course, but we have good reason to believe that millions of lies have been told in the same time. It is therefore at least millions to one that the reporter of a miracle tells a lie.
I want to add one point too, as I think about this, why do people not get the transcendental argument? Now, ultimately, we would say that it's a question of where people's heart is. Certainly in the final analysis. And does a person have to get the transcendental argument to be saved? Well, of course not. That's not the point here. The point is this a valid argument or not? And I think that the main reason on an intellectual level, not on a moral will motives level, the main reason people don't get it is that they're not used to, they're not taught, they're not introduced to the possibility of thinking in a meta way, in a meta level way. Most people's, unfortunately, minds are unable in many cases to even understand or consider a meta level question. So for example, let me give you just one example. If we talk about logic, and we're talking about, if you took a logic class, you were doing Venn diagrams and you're learning fallacies and all that, that's just normative logic. Nothing wrong with that. It's very useful, very good to study logic. It's one of the classes you'll take if you get a philosophy degree. But that's not the same thing as meta logic. Meta logic is a different level. It's a higher level of discipline where we're actually asking what the status of logic itself is. What's the metaphysical status of logic? What are logical entities? What are numbers? What are conceptual entities? Are they located somewhere? Are they purely material? Do they change? Do they evolve? Are they invariant? Were they eternally true? These are meta level questions. And so the transcendental argument is operating on that meta level. So again, I think this is just my personal observation. People are not used to asking meta logic, meta ethics, meta level questions. And so they are confused and they don't understand that the argumentation, the force of the argumentation at this level is so much stronger because it's so broad, paradigmatic, and grand in its scope, you see. Because we're not just looking at a normative argument like, I don't know, let's say we were debating human rights causes, right? Like if you look up the Lincoln Douglas debate, they have the teenage guys debating whether, what was it? Something like, is it just to have a DNA database for criminals, right? And so they go back and forth for an hour on, it is not just because humans have a right to this and blah, 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 right? And they go on and on and on. And, oh, well, you used a circular argument there and blah, 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 blah. And so, I mean, that's like a typical kind of debate. That's not a meta level question or debate. That's we'll call it a normative level debate using normal day-to-day logic, where it is invalid to do a circular argument. It is invalid to appeal to something to appeal to the same thing to justify that thing. But when we go to a higher level or a more foundational level, however you want to make the analogy, it doesn't matter, things are different. If you look at Gödel's incompleteness theorems, they're a form. They're not a transcendental argument for God. They're a mathematical form of a transcendental argument. It's an argument with the same form. And I think that because people are not used to thinking on that scale and on that level, they get very tripped up and very confused. And unfortunately, and this is the only weakness I can see in the transcendental argument is just that it does seem to require a decent amount of IQ to grasp it. Although, ironically, it can be made very simple, right? When, I think, was it Dostoevsky who said that if God doesn't exist, all things are permitted? I mean, that's a simple transcendental argument. You'll find this argument in literature. C.S. Lewis has a transcendental argument where he says basically the same thing. I posted that on my Twitter and on my Instagram. You'll find this kind of an argument in C.S. Lewis's fiction. You'll find this kind of an argument even in Flannery O'Connor, right? What's the misfit? The misfit basically makes that kind of an argument. If I recall, I'm going from memory here, but I had a great class on theodicy and literature, and I was kind of amazed that there's some unintentional transcendental arguments that are made in a lot of important great literature. Flannery O'Connor, C.S. Lewis. I was going to see if I could pull up that C.S. Lewis quote, because that was really good. It's not a long quote, but actually Bahnsen cites C.S. Lewis for transcendental type arguments here and there. By the way, if you have not followed me as a backup on Instagram, I will put my Instagram right there in the chat. Be sure and follow Jay's Analysis on Instagram. And of course, it doesn't want to link. Come on, brah. Yeah. Follow your boy on my Instagram. All 246 of you nerds. Follow my Instagram right there. Right there. And let me find that C.S. Lewis quote. Oh, no, dude, don't do that. Ugh. It's making me like I can't see it because I'm not signed in on the computer. Let me pull it up on my Twitter because I think I put it there too. Yeah, here it is. Whoop, whoop. The whistles go whoop, whoop. Come on. By the way, I don't think am I like banned on Twitter and I don't even know? Anyway, while that's loading, I don't know why it's taking forever to load. There's just a great quote in C.S. Lewis that was so in other words, the point was just that here it is. There are plenty of examples of transcendental arguments that are very easy to understand, that are not super high IQ, but people still don't get it. Supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for its purpose of thinking. It is merely that when the atoms inside my skull happen for physical or chemical reasons to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me as a byproduct the sensation that I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It is like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give me the map of London. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments that lead me to atheism, and therefore no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought. There you go. Bingo. Even though he didn't know that he was giving a transcendental argument, he was. And he's kind of doing the naturalist fallacy or the determinist fallacy there, which actually we called out. That was what I called out JF for. And he didn't get it, and he got really mad. So there you see, again, simple examples of versions of transcendental arguments that you would think would make it easy for people, and yet they seem to get a little confused, a little angry. All right, let's get back to this. Now, we've been going for a good while, so I don't know that we'll, because we want to get to the main chuckles part of the debate that everybody knows is the most famous part of this debate, where at an atheist-dominated audience, Bahnsen actually has the audience laughing at the atheist Gordon Stein. Coming up. It's not yet, but it's coming up.
I think those are good odds. Let me come to the ontological argument, one of the most difficult ones to explain to people. But basically it says God is by definition perfect. A necessary quality of any perfect object is that it exists. If it did not exist, it would not be perfect. If perfection requires existence, then God exists.
Has Jay responded to Vox? What did Vox say? I don't know. Somebody talked about this earlier, but I don't know what Vox said. So Vox did come after Jay? Is it on the blog? A comment on his blog? Let's see if I can find it. I see an old post. Does somebody have a link? Just put me a link. We're a good ways in. We're about done with Stein's bogus reply. It sounds like gossip. So let's see. Probably people just trying to screw around. Here it is. So he posted something September today. All right, I'll read the post here. So we take a little addendum here. Okay, so Male Vox, sympathy for the Dark Lord. As his channel becomes more popular, the Kurgan begins to grasp the essence of Gammitude. As my channel slowly grows, I'm getting renewed empathy for the level of Gamma as well as the general idiocy that you deal with, especially from some of the ilk. I mean, I'm not exactly what you call a very hopeful, optimistic character when it comes to the expectations of rationality in other human beings. This is the Kurgan writing to Vox. But it's truly a wonder to behold to what lengths people will avoid the plain facts in front of them. I don't know who he's talking about. But he's saying they be believing some absurd concept or outright lie that they become invested in. Now, I mean, I did a 2.5 hour deconstruction of sedevacantism, which is what this clown thinks that he is, the Kurgan. And his response doesn't even touch on theology. I mean, it's enough to make me wonder if a lot of humans aren't really monkeys. I mean, this is just nothing but arrogance. Darwin wasn't right, but he may have stumbled onto a Tolkien-like veracity. Possibly Satan makes them orkishly stupid and reminiscent of bonobos, monkeys on crack. You have my sympathy given the few orders of magnitude more of the volume that you deal with. Now, this is a moronic trad. This guy is a trad who has no knowledge of theology, writing to Vox about gamma male behavior. Now, the guy says he won't debate me on his channel, right? I will debate any of the trads. I always open up the trads. Any of these people could come debate me. He goes on to say, this is Vox now, Vox Day. One cannot understand the core concept of gamma without grasping the gamma male's absolute priority is in maintaining the integrity of his delusion bubble. Well, we often invite challengers on here. So if he thinks that if this is about me, I don't know if it's about me, but the Kurgan seems to have an obsession with me, but I don't know who he's talking about here. We'll see here in a minute. But any of these people can come debate me. I'll debate any of them. I'll debate Vox if he wants to debate. I mean, if he'll debate JF, Vox Day is welcome to come debate me as well if he wants to do that. I'll debate the Kurgan too, and I'll show you that guy doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. Vox goes on to say, but what separates a gamma from the gamma pattern of behavior from other males or male behaviors is the way that the gamma applies this instinctive response to everything, especially anything that has potential to threaten his precious self-esteem. Now, again, I don't know this Kurgan dude. He made one critique of me a long time ago, calling me a gamma spurg, and I just ignored the guy. So when I did the sedevacantist stream, and he's a sedevacantist who has no knowledge of philosophy and theology historically, it was all a bunch of just calling me gamma and all this nonsense. So then the guy says that he won't debate. Now, why wouldn't you debate? I mean, if you're interested in what's true, then why not come here and show me where I'm wrong? But I think this guy knows that I'll give him line and verse from any of the Roman Catholic councils. I've read Denzinger through twice. When I get that out of storage, it'll all be ready to go. I'm ready to debate any Thomist. I'll debate Dr. Fesser. I'll debate any of the Thomists. I'm not at all scared of them. Because, by the way, if I was wrong, I want to be shown that I'm wrong. I mean, people get mad and they're like, "You changed your positions." Yeah, because I'm a normal human being who grows and learns new facts and gets things wrong. So of course I've changed my position. And by the way, I haven't changed my position like countless times, like they say. By the way, all the people who've accused me of changing, they've all changed their positions too. So he goes on to say, Vox Day goes on to say, as for the reference to gammas among the dread ilk, keep in mind that being more or less ideologically correct is no defense against a pattern of behavior instilled over the course of one's formative years. I like to think that the gammas among us have at least a fighting chance to conquer their instincts given their information on the subject, but that doesn't change the fact that they are facing a daily battle against themselves that the rest of us will never fully understand or appreciate. Speaking of the Kurgan's channel, his methodical destruction of J. Dyer's criticism of the Roman Catholic Church, here we go, will likely be a little more familiar to anyone who has read one of my systematic critiques. Being neither Catholic nor Orthodox, I have no dog in this hunt, but it always is a pleasure to read through a dialectical argument with this level of attention to detail. So, well, that's unfortunate. It just shows that I appreciate Vox admitting that he doesn't actually know the theological disputes, but if he thinks that guy is a methodical destruction, then Vox is actually less intellectually admiral than I would have given him credit for, because I mean, no wonder he doesn't want to talk to me or anyone on our side of things. And I think he does still have his anti-Trinitarian essay up. So is Vox, are you still an anti-Trinitarian? I mean, if you're interested in what's true, why would you not come debate the topic with me? I would debate you and your Kurgan friend if you actually think that guy's methodical deconstruction. I think that what they're trying to do is get attention for the Kurgan. And I sent Vox an email asking if he would like to have a discussion on gammas, and he doesn't want to do it, apparently. So, hey, Vox, why don't you come debate me? I'll challenge you to a debate. I'll challenge the Kurgan to a debate. Either one of you. And we will go through Denzinger line by line. I will take you through sedevacantism. I will take you through all of these dumb positions, the Novus Ordo position, the SSPX position, and we'll go through the Summa, and I'll show you line by line that I actually do know what I'm talking about. I actually did spend many years in Roman Catholicism. I don't think that, it's funny that if you have not been and have no dog in the fight and are not that well versed in Roman Catholic theology, then how do you know that his argument was a methodical destruction of my criticism? By the way, I have multiple criticisms of the Roman Catholic Church. Is the Roman Catholic Church his sedevacantist position, or is the Roman Catholic Church frank? Which is it? So Vox Day, why don't you come debate? Kurgan, why don't you come debate? Oh, wait, the Kurgan said he won't debate. Right. So, yeah, it's not a methodical destruction of my criticism. I mean, our criticism is hundreds of talks, hundreds of articles, right? So I'm sorry, but Vox Day is not even competent to make a decision on which of these positions is correct. And he does link to that dude's blog or post.
Basic understanding of Christianity, never mind Catholicism and sedevacantism.
I don't have a basic understanding of Christianity. I mean, this guy looks like Devin Townsend on crack. The Kurgan is Devin Townsend on crack. So here is the Kurgan's video. And what does the Kurgan say? Oh, I won't debate him. I won't debate him. So all they wanted was attention. Well, okay, you got it. Here he is saying he won't debate. Okay, here you are, Kurgan. And we all know that whether it's Vox Day or whether it's the Kurgan, if they come on here for a debate, once again, Shade embarrasses himself out by lying. Where did I lie? I gave the sedevacantist position 2.5 hours directly from former Sedevacantists. I myself was in this position. A low IQ. Yeah, right. A low IQ. Come on, bro. Really? Pretending to do so by referring to the number of books that you've read. I didn't just refer to the number of books I read. I gave a 2.5 hour deconstruction of multiple documents, Satis Cognitum, Lamentabili, Mystici Corporis, the documents of Vatican I, over and over deconstructing Roman Catholicism in its Sedevacantist position. Especially as not a valid argument against someone like me, who has probably read as many, if not more, books than Jay ever will. So this is another thing that these losers always do, is they try to list first of all, you don't know how many books I've read. I don't know how many books you've read. To argue and try to debate about the fact that you've read more books than me is nothing but stupid and retarded. That's gamma male behavior. Look at this guy. Charlatans. I'm a charlatan and I'm a gamma. Okay. I will not debate him or waste any time on him unless my fancy takes it later. Unless me fancy. Dude, okay, I'll just go ahead and say it. I don't care whether it's Vox Day or this dude. I will demolish either one of them in a debate. And we all know that. And that's why they don't want to debate. So, sorry, Vox, you actually chose the wrong dude in this side of the debate. Not a wise idea. Look at this guy. Look at this guy's face. He's Devin Townsend on crack. This is the guy. This guy says, I'm a gamma. Look at this guy scowling. I'm the one to be Vox Day. I'm Devin Townsend on crack. I'm the... This ugly ass dude. Yeah. That's what trads have. Trads have that, and thinking that you can prove Catholicism from the history of the Crusades. That's literally what that guy argues, like that the Crusades are going to prove Roman Catholicism. And this guy's completely dishonest because he's never reached out for a debate. He's never reached out to do a discussion. All he's done is say I'm lying and I'm dishonest. I'll debate any of these dudes. Come on my show and debate. So let's get back to this. And by the way, I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to send Vox a challenge to debate. By the way, I know all you guys are going to say it because you're all listening, but yeah, like Jim Licautis, I can't debate, I got hiccups. I've challenged E. Michael Jones 3 times. He won't debate. I mean, it's just so silly. Just the arrogance of these people. It's just like utterly ridiculous. And we all know the Roman Catholics don't actually argue on the basis of the theology. It's just a political, cultural thing. That's all they do. He put on the blog that the Kurgan, who did nothing but a bunch of ad hominems, that he methodically destroyed my argument against Catholicism. The argument was against Sedevacantism. I mean, does Vox even know what these distinctions are?
Since God is perfect. Now, I don't know if you follow that, but I think this has been pretty well ripped to shreds by philosophers, and I think the problem lies with the trouble. The trouble is with the word exist. In order for something to be perfect, it must first exist. I mean, if something did not exist, the word perfect wouldn't mean anything. So first you must have existence, then possibly you may have perfection. So this, again, is going backwards, and you must have an existing God, then you can decide whether he's perfect. If perfectness is a quality of a God, then he may be perfect. But he first must exist. Then we have the moral argument. All people have moral values. The existence of these values cannot be explained unless they were implanted in people by a God. Therefore, God exists. Well, the answer to this is that there are simpler ways of explaining the origin of moral values without requiring the existence of a God to implant them in people. Besides, if moral values did come from a God, then all people should have the same moral values, and they don't. People's moral values are the result of an accommodation which they have made with their particular environment and then taught to their children as a survival mechanism. Okay, then we have the wish argument. Without the existence of a God, people would have no reason to live or be good. Therefore, there has to be a God. Those people believe in a God, therefore there is a God. This really isn't a proof, it's just a wish. It's like saying it would be nice to have a God, which it would, but, that doesn't have anything to do with whether there is one or not. Finally, I'm missing one here. We have the argument from faith. The existence of a God cannot be proven by the use of reason, but only by the use of faith. The use of faith shows that there is a God, therefore God exists. Reason or logic is a proven way of obtaining factual information about the universe. Faith has never been shown to produce true information about the universe because faith is believing something is so because you want it to be so without adequate evidence. Therefore, it can't be used to prove the existence of anything. In addition, the additional fact is that faith often gives you the opposite answer to what is given by reason to the same problem. And this also shows that faith does not provide valid answers. Now, the argument from religious experience, many people have claimed to have had a personal experience or encounter with God, therefore he must exist. Now, this is a difficult one to handle because, first of all, I've never had such an experience, but I'm sure people have absolutely honestly reported having had such experiences. But the feeling of having met God must not be confused with the fact of having met him. This is a confusion, a semantic confusion, and also we cannot use our own feelings as if they were valid information about the world. They are feelings that we have inside of us, but you cannot demonstrate them to another person. They cannot be used as an evidence. If everyone had that same experience, like if we all looked around the room and we all agreed there was a clock over there, then we might say that the vision of a clock was a consensual one, that everyone agreed on it. Other than that, if you saw a clock and nobody else did, or only 2 or 3 people did in the room, we would have a bit of a problem. Pascal's wager is the last of 11 arguments. I hear this a lot on the campuses. It says, since we don't know whether a God exists or not, we have no way of finding out in this life. We have nothing to lose by believing in a God. On the other hand, we have a lot to lose if we do not believe in a God, and therefore the later turns out to be one after we're dead. Well, this is only true if, number one, you're right about a God, and secondly, if you have picked the right religion, because you might wind up at the judgment day and be right about a God, but he says, what religion were you? And you say, I was a believer in Islam, and he said, sorry, Catholicism is the right religion, down you go. So, in addition, we might also have, if we have a God who punishes people who live virtuous lives, let's say an atheist who lived virtuous life, did wonderful deeds in the world, but just did not believe in a God. If the God punishes him, then we have an irrational God who's just as likely to punish the believer as the unbeliever.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. We will now move to our period of cross-examination. The first cross-examiner will be Dr. Bahnsen, who will have an opportunity to cross-examine Dr. Stein. If I could please have silence, we would appreciate it.
Dr. Stein, do you have any sources that you can give to us very briefly that define atheism as one who finds the theistic truths inadequate rather than one who denies the existence of God?
Yes, sir. George Smith's book, which you will find for sale in the back of the room upstairs later.
So I want to interrupt here. That Stein, as you saw, it was nothing but straw men. So Stein only responded to classical arguments that Bahnsen didn't give. And so Bahnsen is calling him out, which is exactly what he should have done. But I wanted to point out, here is the email, challenge to debate. To Vox, since you think the Kurgan destroyed my refutation of sedevacantism, which, by the way, if you're not competent to debate on theology, how do you think he destroyed the argumentation? Do you even know what sedevacantism is as a movement distinct from the normative papal Roman Catholicism? This Kurgan moron is a sedevacantist. He will be like, I will roll over this dude in a debate. It would be nothing, right? But since you think that he destroyed my 2.5 hour talk on sedevacantism, you are welcome to come on and debate me public. You or him, both of you at once, right? I will even debate both of them That's how confident I am, not because of IQs. I mean, that's all he cares about. That's what they worship is IQs. But because the positions are true. Because in Vox Day's mind, he can't figure out that IQ is not what saves you. You can't be saved by your IQ. Ultimately, your IQ is not going to matter. You have to repent. And I guess if Vox Day is going to keep promoting anti-Trinitarianism, if that's what he still promotes, then we can demolish that. We will demolish his dumb argument, his dumb essay on anti-Trinitarianism, if that's what he wants to do. If he wants to debate that, we can debate the Trinity. We can debate whatever topics he wants. Theism. We'll debate Roman Catholicism, right? He doesn't have a dog in the fight, and he's not competent to debate theology. Yeah, whatever, dude. You know what it is? The problem is that with him and this Kurgan guy, it's just a matter of intellect. They think that it's all pride and intellect because that's Western civilization. I mean, that's his whole thing, right? They don't believe in the doctrine of the nous. So Palimism sounds crazy to them because for them, it's just IQs, right? But Orthodoxy is not about IQs. Your IQ is not going to save you. In fact, the more pride you have in your IQ, the further you're moving away from fixing the nous. Now, when we repent, metanoia, right? This doesn't mean that we don't have intellect, we don't use the mind. The mind has a place. But the problem with Vox and the problem with the Kurgan is that their anger, not Vox, but the Kurgan's anger-based philosophy. I mean, look at this dude, right? No wonder stop drinking, bro, first of all. Like, put down stop smoking the magically delicious stop smoking the magically delicious marshmallows. Right? I mean, you look like Devin Townsend on crack, dude. Get off the meth, first of all. Stop being so mad. And like, what are you so mad about? I mean, you're mad because you're a sedevacantist. You're in a dead-end position. There is no sedevacantist church. You're not in a church. It doesn't exist. You can't be in union with the idea of the See of Rome. So this guy, we don't even know if the guy is even a Christian, right? And what does he say? He starts this whole thing out, J. Dyer has no idea what a Christian is. Dude, what are you talking about? Like, you're a sedevacantist. You're not in a church at all. It doesn't exist. All right. So I said I was going to get more open about this kind of stuff. And all these people want to do is have drama to get audiences. That's what this is about. They don't actually care about whether the positions are true, in my opinion. In my opinion, they just want to cause a stir to get an audience. And typically I ignore this stuff until it just becomes constant. So, but Vox Day wants to publicly say that he thinks this guy destroyed me. Yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's get on the stream and let's break out all the documents and let's work through the documents and let's see who destroyed who, right? I mean, I guess I'm just going to have to do page by page by page on my own stream because nobody else will come on and defend their positions. So, Bahnsen calling out Stein. Let's get back to this.
Well, Atheism, the Case Against God, which I think is the finest book ever written on the subject, makes this quite explicit. I happen to have a copy right here. I can quote you the exact words if you'd like to see them.
That won't be necessary.
Okay.
Do you have any other sources?
Do I have any other sources?
Any other sources?
Sure.
What would they be?
Charles Bradlaugh, who I will give them to you right now. 100 years ago, Charles Bradlaugh made the comment in his a plea for atheism. He said,
That'll be fine.
Okay. Well,
Dr. Stein, did you hear Dr. Bahnsen use the following argument? The Bible says that God exists, and the Bible is the inspired word of God, therefore what it says must be true, therefore God exists.
you did not use that, you just assumed that was so because you were quoting from the Bible as if it proved
I didn't
existence
ask you
of
what
God.
I assumed, I asked you if I used that argument.
No, you did not use the argument, but you used the results of the argument.
Dr. Stein, you mentioned 11 basic proofs for the existence of God. Did you mention the transcendental proof for the existence of God?
No, I didn't mention it by name. I think it is not a proof. I would not call it a proof. As I understand it from what you said.
On that point. In other words, you didn't deal with that particular one. Are all factual questions answered in the very same way?
No, they are not. They're answered by the use of certain methods, though, that are the same. Reason, logic, and presenting evidence.
Right. I heard you mention logical binds and logical self-contradictions in your speech. You did say that?
I said it. I used that phrase, yes.
Do you believe there are laws of logic, then?
Absolutely.
Are they universal?
They're agreed upon by human beings. They aren't laws that exist out in nature.
Are they simply conventions, then?
They're conventions, but they're conventions that are self-verifying.
Are they sociological laws or laws of thought?
They are laws of thought which are interpreted by men and promulgated by men.
Are they material in nature?
How can a law be material?
That's the question I'm going to ask you. Thank you.
I would say no.
Dr. Stein, now you have an opportunity to cross-examine Dr. Bahnsen.
Dr. Bahnsen, would you call God material or immaterial?
Immaterial.
What is something that's immaterial?
Something not extended in space.
Can you give me an example of anything other than God that's immaterial?
Laws of logic.
Hey, Vox, everybody thinks that I would demolish you in a debate. Oh. And by the way, Kurgan, nobody thinks that you would win a debate. That was the great point, of course, in the Bahnsen-Stein debate, where Bahnsen crushed Stein, the audience laughing at the absurdity of the atheist position. So the laws of logic, right? Immaterial, invariant, conceptual. These are easily demonstrable to the atheist because they utilize them all the time, and the atheist relies on them. The atheist thinks that his position is rational and logical, and yet when Stein sets the parameters of what exists as strictly physical, what happens? Bahnsen crushes him by pointing out that you're appealing to things that in your own worldview are not physical. And so Bahnsen turned the tables and, of course, had the audience laughing. So there we go. That's the killer point in the Bahnsen-Stein debate. And I think that we've gone for we're approaching 3 hours, aren't we? Right. So maybe it's time to read the super chats. So if you have a super chat, you can link that now, post that up, post it on a block, and then we will maybe do the rest of the debate later. I think it would be better because there's actually some really good points that Bahnsen hammers home later on about when Stein restricts things to only empirical observations, and then Bahnsen comes back and talks about Stein appealing to other things that are not empirical, and Stein gets tripped up again. And then the closing statements are good too. But we got almost halfway, so I think maybe it would be better to continue this in a part 2. Oh wait, here we go. Stream settings. How long have I been going? We got 283. What's up, 283 nerds in the house? It's sad that a lot of people in the alt media sphere, they want to get caught up in drama. And I mean, you can grow your channels without drama. It's not required. I guess it'll work. But by the way, the people that we realize this with Worski, the people who come for drama, they don't stay around. They're just there for drama. And once you don't have the drama, they move on. Let's read some of these super chats, and then we will call it a night, and then we'll move to the second half of this discussion later on. Lonely Octopus is a new member to the channel. Welcome, Lonely Octopus. Now, I've been nice. I've been so nice. And I'm tired of being nice in the sense of like people who just constantly rag and say stupid shit. And it's time to call them out. And E. Michael Jones is not going to come on in here to debate because E. Michael Jones is a papal lawyer. E. Michael Jones doesn't know theology. He doesn't know anything about the first millennium of Christianity in terms of patristic theology. I guarantee you he hasn't read anything from St. Basil. He hasn't read St. Maximus. He hasn't read any of these people. He doesn't know what's in St. Gregory Palamas. So that's why he won't debate. And what does he do? He fishes me off on Jim Licautus, his big brother. And Jim Licautus won't debate because of hiccups, which is ridiculous. So again, when these people go after the positions that we hold to, does Vox think that sedevacantism is valid Roman Catholicism? His argument doesn't even make any sense. Vox has said in his streams he's not competent to discuss and debate theology. Then how is he competent to determine between some minutiae of sedevacantism whether that's valid or invalid argumentation in respect to Roman Catholicism? It doesn't even make any sense. Max Power, NOK 50. Good evening, Jay. Good evening for those 50 Knox Max Power. Jeff Mullins. 610. What are 610 rabbits? Little rabbit heads? Thoughts on Matthew Johnson? Does he belong to a canonical jurisdiction? I don't know. Somebody can find that out. I would be interested to know. Doorman $2. Do a video series demolishing the Summa. Now, we did a talk a long time ago on the Summa. And again, the people that are commenting on these topics don't have any knowledge of the issues, right? Classical theist, he doesn't have the time or the energy to go and discuss and read all the Palamite stuff. Even when I buy him the books, he refunds the money because he doesn't want to read it because he is scared. And that's okay. It's okay to be scared, bro. I understand you're scared. But let's see. We did a talk long ago. 20,000, 30,000 views. Let's see. And by the way, I'm not stupid. I know that they said these things because they wanted me to debate them. Okay, fine. Why don't you just ask me to debate? Like, instead of, you don't have to stir up drama. Why don't you just ask me to debate? It's just childish. That's the gamma male behavior. Like starting a cat fight like a damn teenage girl. Roman Catholicism. Ecumenism. Why didn't the Kurgan come into the Discord? We open up the Discord like every 2 days. So there's the old talk that I did. Do a reaction video. But these people they'll come after your channel. If I do a reaction to his video, he'll pull my channel. He'll complain about it and try to do a copyright. That's how these people are. Yep. So any of these people, you come on and debate me. If you want to do it, let's do it. I do it all the time. We set up debates all the time. They won't come on and do it. Remember when Luke pined for 6 months for a debate, and I finally let him on, and he went ape. He went crazy. So that's why the way these people act. Why would I let you on here? You know what? I should let you on here because you make your own position look crazy. So actually, we should get the Kurgan on because that guy will be an embarrassment to the whole sedevacanist position. Sarah Rochelle, new member. What's up, Sarah? Thank you for becoming a member. Much appreciated. Franklin Chan, $15. Franklin Chan, big supporter. Longtime supporter. Thank you so much. Doorman 360 once again, $2. Off topic, but is the Dawson debate? No, I don't think It's going to happen. I think that there was some issues, but look, I'm sorry. Ryan Dawson is going to be, he would be demolished in a debate with me. He has the philosophical argumentation level of a high schooler, a high school atheist. And he said, I was afraid to debate him. No, I'm not. You will be demolished. I'm sorry, but I'm not being arrogant. I'm telling you that if you have no philosophical training, you can't argue with people who do high-level graduate transcendental argumentation, analytical philosophy work. You're not going to win. And it's not because of IQs. It's because of it's just silly. It would be like some dude who's been playing guitar for like 2 years, man. I could take on any freaking classical guitarist. No, you can't. It's just stupid. It's prideful to think that way. Remember the trad yesterday? The traditionalist who came into the Discord? I will demolish you in a debate. And within 5 minutes, he didn't even know what Vatican I was or said. He thought it was a book. Demolished. Spec 7 Re 82 $9.99. What's up, Spec? Hosehead $20. What's up, Hosehead? Elizabeth Leclerc $9.99. Thank you, Elizabeth Leclerc. Much appreciated. Dalton $10. Thank you so much. Will you debate an intactivist? I don't know what an intactivist is. Is that on circumcision? I mean, circumcision isn't an issue for us as Orthodox, so I don't know why would I debate that? We don't hold that. We hold that baptism has fulfilled circumcision. So why would I'm not being denied. So if I say why would I debate that, the first thing this is he's scared. He's running. He won't debate. Like I don't know what intactivism is, and I mean I don't understand what there would be to debate on circumcision. Because as Orthodox, we believe that circumcision is fulfilled in baptism. So I don't know what there would be to debate. Hosehead, $10. Thank you, Hosehead. Much appreciated. You get $30 from Hosehead. What's up, Hosehead? Got them hose head right up here. Your mama got a hose head. Angel of Wrath, $5. What do you mean? And his fellow Protestant YouTubers, including Aspiring Philosophy, did a stream where I came up and they all said that none of them will debate you. Yeah, of course they won't. And they won't because they have the excuse, he's too mean. He's too mean. And then the Kurgan who spends 30 minutes with his crackhead ugly Devin Townsend look trying to make a refutation. He says, I won't debate him. I won't debate him, Mr. Frodo. Mr. Frodo, I won't debate him. But because if he takes my fancy. And his frown. No, of course Inspiring Philosophy and Cucking Christianity with Cameron will not debate me because they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, why would Inspiring Philosophy debate? See, Inspiring Philosophy agreed to the debate before he realized that I'm not just a goofus, that I actually know what I'm talking about. All right. So, yeah, Kurgan, bring it on, bro. Come on here and we'll let you have your way and we will demolish you. And Vox Day, you think he demolished me? Come on here. I'll demolish both of you at once. Thank you guys for those super chats. Kirk Cameron. Yeah, right. Kirk Cameron is a better theologian than Cucking Christianity with Cameron. And I don't care if they say I'm mean. Mr. Frodo, please, I'm too scared to debate. I'm scared to debate him. Why do I look like Devin Townsend on crack? Why do I look like Vox Gay? I must suck up to Vox Gay. Do you know how quickly Vox Day would be demolished in a debate? A guy who defends anti-Trinitarianism, hypothetically, in essays. Right. And that's why he put the qualifier in his article that he would not win the debate because he doesn't have a dog in the fight. Then how do you know the Kurgan is correct? It doesn't make any sense. Anyway. Yeah, so look, all of you haters out there, we make it very easy for people to debate. All you have to do, I know he's a set of occultist, right? That's why he's mad, is because by the way, he even said he's not prepared to deal with the theological arguments. And that's why he thinks that historical things like the Crusades prove, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. Please come on. Please tell the Kurgan, please come on my stream, dude. I will demolish it. I will demolish this position. And by the way, you can call me names. I don't care if you call me names. You can come on the stream and call me names. How many times have we had clowns on the stream yelling and streaming and calling names? It just makes your position look dumb. He just wants attention and followers. Well, sometimes you get what you wish for and you may not want it because you're going to look like an idiot. So please, Kurgan, please come on my channel. Please. Let's do this. We can do it any day you want. We can do it tomorrow. And if you're too pussy to come on the channel, come to the Discord, bro. You can come to the Discord. We'll send you the Discord link and we can debate for 5 hours straight if you want to. Vox Day, you can come in my Discord. We'll debate for 5 hours straight. We'll do whatever you want, brah. All right. I was baptized Gregory Palamas. That's cool. He was the one that showed the truth of Orthodoxy. Absolutely. I mean, do these people even read? They don't even read what they don't even read what Palamas says. It's like, but see, part of the problem is that it's not just a matter of intellect, right? I mean, I think that the thing that would keep Vox Day from being Orthodox is just pride. And that's the problem with all of this set of contests, is the pride too. And by the way, why didn't the Kurgan respond to John Petrello? Because most of the arguments were from John Petrello's book. Right? I think some of these people, like the Kurgan, they may actually be just disinfo. Right? So, I don't know. Because, I mean, the guy doesn't have any theological competency whatsoever. A very low IQ debate. Remember, this is important. We're not BTFOing anybody out of hatred. I don't hate any of these people. I used to be in the Roman Catholic realm. I know what it's like. That's why they're so mad, though, is because I was in that realm. So I know it inside and out. And I actually do know Thomism. I think what I'm going to eventually do is series of lectures on Thomism. Golden Arm 2007 says Bahnsen did a great job against George Smith. Yeah, absolutely he did. It would make for a great analysis. Yeah, the Bahnsen Stein, Bahnsen Smith, and then there's one more, Tabash. The Tabash debate you have to track down in MP3 format. It's good too, because Tabash has some really some different arguments that you don't hear in the other atheist debates that Bahnsen deals with very well. So if you can track down the Bahnsen-Tabash debate, it's a good one to do too. But the Bahnsen-Stein debate is just the most famous one. So we covered about the first half, and we've gone on for a while. So we'll try to hit the rest of this next time around. And yes, go tell the Kurgan and Vox Day, I'm dying to debate them both, bro. I'll demolish them both. I'll put you back inside your golden pot of marshmallow goodness, and I'll kick you back across the rainbow, laddie.